I'm Donatella John, and I'm 30 years old. Last December, during a historic Colorado blizzard, my mother-in-law locked me and my 3-week-old baby out of her house. The wind chill was 14 below zero. She spoke to me through the Ring doorbell while I stood barefoot on the frozen concrete porch. When you learn respect for the matriarch of this family, the door will open. My husband, the man I married on a warm beach in Maui just 2 years prior, texted me from inside the house. "Stop causing drama, Donna. Just apologize to my mom. It's not that cold." He watched me freeze. I stood there, clutching my newborn in a thin cardigan, my toes turning blue, banging on the frosted glass, until a stranger from across the street threw a heavy wool coat over my shoulders and pulled me away. That stranger happened to be a senior partner at the most ruthless corporate law firm in Denver, and his security cameras had just recorded the entire thing. Before I tell you exactly how we used that footage to tear my in-laws' high society empire apart brick by brick, hit like and subscribe to the Revenge Order channel. Let me know your age in the comments, and tell me where you are watching from. Now, let me take you back to 3 hours before that deadbolt clicked, back to the moment the illusion of my perfect marriage finally shattered. I had moved to Cherry Hills, Colorado from Honolulu right after the wedding. Bradley insisted. He worked in middle management at his father's logistics firm, and Victoria, his mother, had offered us a suite in their sprawling 12,000-square-foot estate while we supposedly looked for our own place. The house smelled of imported lilies and lemon-scented floor wax, a sterile scent that always made my throat tighten. The air inside felt thin, manufactured. In Hawaii, our doors were always open. Here, every interaction was a transaction. They viewed my job as a remote user experience designer as a cute hobby, politely ignoring the fact that my salary doubled Bradley's. To Victoria, I was a naive island girl who needed to be groomed for Denver high society. The afternoon of the storm, the tension in the house was thick enough to crack. The snow had started falling around noon, thick, heavy flakes piling up against the triple-pane windows. I was sitting in the formal living room trying to nurse Leo. My back ached. I had slept maybe 3 hours over the last 2 days. Victoria swept into the room, her heels clicking sharp and fast against the hardwood floors. She carried a silver tray with a pre-mixed bottle of formula. "Donatella, dear," she said, her voice dripping with that practiced aristocratic sweetness she used when she was about to issue a command. "You look exhausted. Let me give Leo this bottle. I've added a little rice cereal. It will help him sleep through the night." I pulled my nursing shawl tighter around my shoulder. "No thank you, Victoria. The pediatrician was very clear. We are strictly breastfeeding to get his weight up. No cereal." Victoria stopped. The silver tray hovered in midair. Her smile remained, but her eyes, a pale, washed-out blue, hardened. "We raised 3 healthy boys in this house, Donatella. I think I know a thing or two about infant nutrition. You need to stop being so rigid. It's unbecoming." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I kept my gaze steady on hers. "I appreciate your experience, Victoria, but Leo is my son. The answer is no." The silence that followed was suffocating. In the Carver household, no one said no to Victoria. Not Richard, her husband, who was currently sipping scotch in his study, and certainly not Bradley, who was sitting on the adjacent velvet sofa, scrolling through his phone. "Bradley," I said, hoping he would look up, hoping he would interject. He didn't lift his head. "Just let her help, Donna. Mom knows what she's doing." Victoria set the tray down on the glass coffee table with a sharp clatter. "You lack respect, Donatella. You come into my home, eat my food, and dismiss my guidance. In this family, we do things my way, or you'll find yourself left out in the cold." It sounded like a metaphor. I brushed it off as another one of her dramatic, controlling monologues. I stood up, adjusting Leo in my arms. I need to put him down for a nap. "Before you do that," Victoria snapped, pointing toward the back of the house, Fetch some firewood from the patio stack. The fire is dying down, and I refuse to let a chill into this room. The manual labor might help clear your head. I looked at Bradley again. He finally looked up from his screen, giving me a short, impatient nod. Just grab the wood, Donna. Keep the peace. I exhaled a slow, shaky breath. Fine. I pulled my cashmere cardigan tighter around myself and Leo. It was a flimsy $400 sweater Bradley had bought me. It felt more like a prop than actual clothing. I walked down the long hallway toward the mudroom. The temperature dropped the further I got from the living room fireplace. I opened the heavy back door. The wind hit me instantly, biting into my exposed ankles. The patio was covered in 2 inches of fresh snow. I stepped out, shivering, calculating how fast I could grab a log with one hand while holding Leo with the other. The heavy oak door slammed shut behind me. The sharp, metallic click of the deadbolt locking echoed over the howling wind. I spun around. My breath caught in my throat. Through the frosted glass panes, I saw Victoria walking away, her posture straight, her heels clicking back toward the living room. I rushed to the door, grabbing the handle. It wouldn't budge. I knocked on the wood, lightly at first, thinking it was a mistake, an automatic lock catching in the wind. "Victoria," I called out. The wind snatched my words away before they reached the glass. "Victoria, open the door." No one came. The temperature was dropping rapidly. My bare feet stung as the snow melted against my skin. I pulled my phone from my pajama pocket. My hands were already shaking, my thumbs stiff, as I typed out a message to Bradley. "Open the back door. Victoria locked me out." I stared at the screen. The battery icon was red. 12%. The cold was draining it. 3 gray dots appeared on the screen. Bradley was typing. I waited for the horror, the immediate apology, the sound of him rushing down the hallway. The message appeared. "Stop causing drama, Donna. Just apologize to my mom. It's not that cold." My stomach plummeted. He wasn't rushing to help me. He knew exactly what his mother had done, and he was enforcing her punishment. A gust of wind tore across the patio, throwing a fresh sheet of icy powder over my bare toes. Leo let out a weak, reedy whimper. I looked down at my son. His lips, usually the color of crushed strawberries, were taking on a faint, terrifying shade of lavender. Panic, raw and primal, flooded my chest. I pounded my fist against the frosted glass. "Open the door! Bradley, open the door!" The house remained perfectly still. They were inside, warm and comfortable, drinking scotch and waiting for me to break. They were waiting for me to grovel at the Ring doorbell, to beg for their mercy. I pulled my phone back up. I needed to call 911, but a cold realization stopped me. Richard's brother, Thomas, was the chief of police in Cherry Hills. If I called the cops, Thomas's deputies would show up. They would find me standing on the porch of a multi-million-dollar estate, a hysterical, sleep-deprived new mother. Victoria would play the victim. She would say I wandered out there in a postpartum fugue state. They would write up a mental health hold. I would lose Leo. My legs began to tremble. It was involuntary, my body's desperate attempt to generate heat. The phone slipped from my rigid fingers, clattering onto the frozen patio stones. 10% battery. Then 9. I remembered my grandmother sitting on her lanai back in Oahu, braiding palm fronds. She had looked at me once and said, "Watch what a man lets his mother do to you. A man who hides behind his mother's skirt will let you freeze." The metaphor had become my literal reality. I was freezing. The people-pleasing wife, trying to fit into high society, died on that porch. I looked at the dark windows of the house, and a new, calculating coldness settled into my bones. A shadow moved at the edge of the property line. I couldn't scream. My throat felt tight, restricted by the frigid air. Footsteps crunched through the snow. A figure stepped onto the patio. Something heavy, smelling of cedar and old paper, draped over my shoulders. A dense, scratchy wool coat swallowed me and Leo, instantly trapping our fading body heat. "Keep him covered," a gravelly voice instructed. I turned my head. It was the man from the fortress-like estate across the street. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't knock on the door to demand answers from my in-laws. He just placed a firm hand on my shoulder and guided me away from the house, stepping out into the storm. To understand how I ended up freezing on that concrete slab, you have to go back exactly 3 hours before the deadbolt clicked. The morning had started with a quiet, creeping tension. I was sitting at the kitchen island staring at lines of code on my laptop. As a remote user experience designer for a global financial tech company, my days required intense focus. I mapped out digital pathways, untangled complex logical knots, and built systems designed to be foolproof. I grew up in Hilo, Hawaii. My childhood home was a chaotic symphony of aunties, uncles, and cousins, cooking in the backyard, laughing loud enough to rattle the windows. Our doors were always unlocked. Love was loud, love was warm. The Carver Estate in Colorado was a mausoleum. Everything was decorated in shades of beige, cream, and silver. The air smelled of imported lilies and harsh chemical cleaners. There was no joy in this house, only performance. Richard Carver walked into the kitchen wearing a pressed suit just to check the morning mail. He dropped a thick envelope onto the marble counter in front of Bradley, who was eating an apple. "Your allowance for the country club fees," Richard said, not breaking his stride as he headed toward his study. Bradley mumbled a quick thank you, his shoulders slumping slightly. He worked in middle management at his father's logistics firm. He held a title that sounded important on paper, but carried zero real authority. My UX salary was double his income. I paid for my own premium health insurance. I funded our joint savings account. Yet, in the eyes of my in-laws, my career was an adorable distraction. "Still playing your computer games, Donna?" Richard would ask with a condescending chuckle whenever he saw my laptop open. They treated me like a naive island girl they had generously adopted. They needed to believe they were my saviors, because the alternative was admitting their own son was entirely dependent on my paycheck. I ignored their remarks. I swallowed my pride to keep the peace. But the microaggressions evolved into a steady, suffocating pressure after Leo was born. 3 hours before the lockout, the tension finally snapped over a pebble. A small, seemingly insignificant moment that broke the facade wide open. I was in the formal living room, attempting to nurse my son. My back ached with the dull, persistent throb that follows childbirth. I had slept maybe 3 hours over the last 2 days. Victoria swept into the room, her heels clicking sharp and fast against the hardwood floors. She carried a silver tray holding a crystal bowl, a tiny spoon, and a pre-mixed bottle of formula. "Donatella, dear," she said. Her voice dripped with that practiced, aristocratic sweetness she used whenever she prepared to issue a command. "You look exhausted. Let me give Leo this bottle. I have added a little rice cereal. It will help him sleep through the night." I pulled my nursing shawl tighter around my shoulder, adjusting Leo's fragile weight against my chest. "No, thank you, Victoria." The pediatrician was very clear. "We are strictly breastfeeding to get his weight up. No cereal." Victoria stopped. The silver tray hovered in midair. Her smile remained fixed, but her eyes hardened into flat, pale discs of ice. "We raised 3 healthy boys in this house, Donatella. I think I know a thing or two about infant nutrition. You need to stop being so rigid. It is unbecoming." My chest tightened. I was a guest in her house, but I was the mother of this child. I kept my voice even, refusing to let her bait me into a shouting match. "I appreciate your experience, Victoria, but Leo is my son. The answer is no." The silence that followed felt heavy enough to crush bone. In the Carver household, no one defied the matriarch. Victoria ruled her domain with financial threats and emotional manipulation. I looked over at Bradley, who was sitting on the adjacent velvet sofa. He was scrolling through his phone, pretending not to hear the quiet war unfolding 5 feet away from him. "Bradley," I said, asking for a lifeline. He sighed, dragging his eyes away from his screen. He looked at his mother, then at me. His expression held no support, only deep irritation that I was disrupting his quiet afternoon. "Just let her help, Donna. Mom knows what she is doing. Stop making things difficult." Victoria set the tray down on the glass coffee table. The crystal bowl clattered sharply against the metal. The mask of the doting grandmother slipped away entirely, revealing the cold, calculating woman beneath. "You lack respect, Donatella," Victoria sneered, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "You come into my home, eat my food, and dismiss my guidance. In this family, we do things my way, or you will find yourself left out in the cold." The words hung in the air. I thought it was just another theatrical threat. I thought she was talking about withholding her affection or cutting Bradley out of a will. I stood up, cradling Leo securely against my chest. "I need to put him down for a nap," I said. "Before you do that," Victoria commanded, pointing a manicured finger toward the back hallway, "fetch some firewood from the patio stack. The fire is dying down, and I refuse to let a chill into this room. The manual labor might help clear your head." I stared at her. I was recovering from childbirth. I was holding a newborn. She wanted me to haul logs of wood. I turned to Bradley again. He gave me a short, impatient nod. "Just grab the wood, Donna. Keep the peace." My husband was not my partner. He was a cowardly enforcer for his mother's ego. I exhaled a slow, shaky breath. Fine. I pulled the flimsy cashmere cardigan tighter around myself and Leo. I walked down the long hallway toward the mudroom. The temperature dropped the further I got from the living room fireplace. The heated hardwood floors transitioned to freezing slate tiles. I opened the heavy oak back door. The storm hit me instantly, biting into my exposed ankles. The patio was covered in a thick layer of fresh snow. I stepped out, shivering, calculating how fast I could grab a log with one hand while keeping Leo warm with the other. The heavy door slammed shut behind me. The sharp, metallic click of the deadbolt locking echoed over the howling wind. I spun around. Through the frosted glass panes, I saw Victoria walking away. Her posture was straight, her heels clicking back toward the living room. I grabbed the handle. It refused to turn. I knocked on the wood, lightly at first, thinking the automatic lock had caught in the wind. "Victoria," I called out. The wind snatched my words away before they reached the glass. No one came. Standing there on the freezing concrete, watching the snow swirl around my bare feet, a profound realization washed over me. This was not a misunderstanding. This was not a petty argument over baby formula. My marriage was a hostage situation. Bradley had surrendered my dignity, my safety, and his own son to appease his mother's shattered narcissistic ego. I was a financial asset to Bradley, a prop to Victoria, and a disposable outsider to all of them. They held my life in their hands, and they were willing to risk my newborn son just to teach me a lesson about obedience. The wind howled again, tearing through the thin fabric of my sweater. I pressed my back against the locked door to shield Leo from the biting gusts. My physical body was freezing, but a different kind of cold was settling deep inside my chest. The naive, people-pleasing island girl died on that porch. I stopped looking at the frosted glass with hope. I looked at it with the calculating, ruthless logic of a woman who was going to dismantle their entire world. The cold sank its teeth into my flesh, a sharp, gnawing pain that traveled from my exposed toes all the way up to my lungs. Every breath felt like inhaling ground glass. I tucked Leo deeper inside my cardigan, curling my body forward to block the swirling snow. His tiny weight against my chest was the only anchor tethering me to reality. I pulled my phone out again, my fingers clumsy and stiff. The battery icon glowed an angry red, 9%. I stared at the screen, reading Bradley's text message over and over. "Stop causing drama, Donna. Just apologize to my mom. It's not that cold." He was inside the warm house. He knew his mother had locked the door. He knew I was barefoot in a blizzard with his infant son. And his instinct was to frame my suffering as a theatrical performance. "I am freezing," I typed back, the letters appearing slowly under my rigid thumbs. "Open the door now, or I am calling 911. I waited, my heart drumming a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The gray typing bubbles appeared. Bradley's response popped onto the screen, and the psychological torture began in earnest. "Are you crazy? You wandered out there in a tantrum because my mom tried to help you feed the baby. Stop threatening me. You need psychiatric help if you think calling the cops is a normal reaction to a disagreement." My breath hitched. He was rewriting the narrative while the event was actively happening. He was laying the groundwork to label me unstable, hysterical, a danger to myself. The gaslighting was swift and suffocating. Victoria had locked the deadbolt, but Bradley was building the prison walls. "Call 911, the thought screamed in my mind. "Dial the numbers, get a patrol car out here, have them break down the door." But my thumb froze over the keypad. The terrifying reality of high society Colorado crashed over me. Richard's older brother, Thomas, was the chief of police for Cherry Hills. I pictured the scene playing out. The patrol car rolling up the driveway, 2 deputies stepping onto the porch to find a shivering, sleep-deprived woman ranting about a locked door. Victoria would emerge, wearing a concerned, maternal expression. She would offer the officers hot coffee. Bradley would show them the text messages where he begged his unstable wife to stop being dramatic. They would point to the unlocked front door and claim I had simply walked around to the back in a postpartum fugue state. They had local authority. They had deep pockets. They had established social capital. I had no shoes, no coat, and no proof. Thomas's deputies would not arrest my in-laws. They would call an ambulance and issue a mandatory mental health hold. They would strap me to a gurney, sedate me, and hand full custody of my son to Victoria. If I called the police, I would be handing them the exact ammunition they needed to take Leo away from me forever. A fresh gust of wind roared across the patio, snatching a sob from my throat. My body began to violently shake. The trembling was a biological alarm bell ringing through my nervous system, a warning that my core temperature was dropping to critical levels. I squeezed my eyes shut against the blinding white snow. In the darkness behind my eyelids, I saw my grandmother. Tutu sat on the woven rattan chair on our lanai in Oahu, her hands deftly weaving green palm fronds into a basket. The air smelled of plumeria and salt water. The memory felt so vivid, so warm, it almost brought me to my knees. I was 20 years old in the memory, complaining about a college boyfriend who always canceled our dates when his mother needed her car washed or her groceries carried. Tutu had paused her weaving. She fixed her dark, ancient eyes on me, her gaze piercing right through my youthful naivete. "Watch a man carefully, Donatella," she had said, her voice raspy and melodic. "Watch what he lets his mother do to you. A man who hides behind his mother's skirt will let you freeze. You cannot build a home with a coward." The warning had sounded like poetic advice back then. Standing on the frozen concrete in Colorado 10 years later, the metaphor had materialized into my literal reality. I was freezing. Bradley was a coward, and my son was paying the price. I opened my eyes. The snow was piling up around my ankles. I looked down at Leo. He was too quiet. The frantic, reedy whimpering from a few minutes ago had stopped. His eyelids looked heavy, his breathing shallow. The terrifying lavender hue was spreading from his lips to his cheeks. Something broke inside of me. The fracture was clean, permanent, and silent. The woman who spent 2 years smiling politely at country club dinners. The woman who swallowed insults about her Hawaiian heritage to keep the peace. The woman who deposited her hard-earned salary into a joint account to make her husband feel successful. That woman died on the ice. A cold, calculating stillness replaced the panic. I stopped banging on the door. I stopped begging for Bradley to save me. They were not my family. They were an obstacle. They were an enemy holding me captive, and I was going to burn their empire to the ground. My phone vibrated in my palm. One final text from Bradley illuminated the screen before the battery icon flashed empty. Let me know when you are ready to be a respectful wife. The screen went black. The digital tether to my abusers was severed. I stood in the howling wind, completely isolated, formulating a survival plan. I needed to wrap Leo in my shirt, walk around the side of the massive estate, and reach the street. I would break a neighbor's window if I had to. I would trigger a security alarm to force a response. Before I could take a step, a large, dark silhouette emerged from the swirling whiteout conditions near the property line. I shrank back against the locked door, my protective instincts flaring. My throat was too raw to scream. The figure moved closer, crunching through the deep snow. It was a man, tall and broad-shouldered. He didn't hesitate. He stepped onto the patio, pulled a heavy, scratchy wool coat from his own shoulders, and threw it over me. The dense fabric swallowed me and Leo, instantly trapping our fading body heat. The smell of cedar and old paper filled my nose. Keep 'em covered, the man instructed, his voice gravelly and calm. I looked up. He was older, perhaps in his mid-60s, with sharp silver hair dusted with snow. He wore a tailored suit underneath the coat. I recognized him from the fortress-like estate across the street. His name was Harrison Sterling. We had never formally spoken, only exchanged polite nods when checking the mail. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't knock on the frosted glass to demand answers from my in-laws. He didn't act surprised to find a barefoot woman holding a baby in a blizzard. He placed a firm, steady hand on my shoulder. "Walk," he commanded. "Do not look back. We are going to my house." I followed him. Every step through the snow felt like walking on shattered glass, but the wool coat provided a crucial shield against the wind. We crossed the manicured lawn, the deep drifts pulling at my pajama pants. I focused entirely on Harrison's broad back, trusting the stranger simply because he was moving me away from the nightmare. We reached the street, the asphalt slick with black ice. The Carver mansion faded behind a curtain of falling snow. The imposing facade of Harrison's home loomed ahead, dark and silent except for a series of small, glowing red lights mounted beneath the eaves. Harrison unlocked his heavy front door and ushered me inside. Warm air rushed over me, bringing tears to my eyes. The transition from freezing panic to sudden safety was overwhelming. But as Harrison locked his own deadbolt and turned to face me, I realized I had not just found a sanctuary. I had found a weapon. The heavy oak door sealed shut, locking the blizzard outside. The entryway of the neighbor's home wrapped around me like a physical embrace. Radiant heating beneath the dark slate floors immediately began to thaw my frozen toes. I peeled away the thick wool coat, exposing Leo to the warm air. For a terrifying second, he remained silent. Then, his tiny chest hitched, and he let out a sharp, piercing wail. The sound of his lungs working, of blood pumping back into his extremities, was the most beautiful music I had ever heard. Tears of profound relief blurred my vision. I sank to my knees on the heated floor, holding my crying son, rocking him gently as the lavender tint receded from his lips, replaced by a healthy, flushing pink. My savior walked past me without intruding on the moment. He moved down the hallway, returning a minute later with a stack of heated thermal blankets and a mug of dark, steaming tea. He draped the thickest blanket over my shoulders and handed me the mug. "Drink," he said. "It has ginger and a splash of bourbon. It will raise your core temperature. I took a sip. The liquid burned a fiery path down my throat, settling into my stomach and sending a rush of heat outward. I looked at the man. In the bright recessed lighting of his foyer, Harrison Sterling looked even more formidable. He possessed the sharp, hawk-like features of someone who spent their life analyzing the weaknesses of others. He gestured for me to follow him. We moved into a sprawling study lined with floor-to-ceiling mahogany bookshelves. The room smelled of old leather and fine cigars. Behind an expansive desk sat a bank of ultra-high-definition monitors, displaying various angles of the street and the Carver estate. On the wall behind the desk hung framed credentials. They detailed a long career in the district attorney's office, followed by partnership certificates for one of the most feared corporate litigation firms in Denver. Harrison sat behind the desk and motioned to a leather armchair near the radiator. I sat, pulling Leo close, wrapping the thermal blanket around both of us. "You are Harrison Sterling," I said, my voice hoarse but steady. He nodded, tapping a gold pen against his desk blotter. "And you are Donatella." The daughter-in-law Richard and Victoria treat like a decorative lawn ornament. I bristled slightly, but his blunt observation was undeniable. "Why did you come out into the storm for me?" Harrison leaned forward, resting his forearms on the desk. He did not offer a gentle, paternal smile. His expression remained strictly business. "I do not believe in fairy tales, Donatella. I believe in leverage. 3 years ago, Richard Carver attempted to use corrupt city council connections to rezone the southern acreage of my property for a commercial logistics warehouse. When I fought the zoning board, his brother Thomas, your local police chief, parked marked cruisers at the end of my driveway for a month to intimidate my clients. They assumed my retirement from the DA's office meant I lacked teeth. They forgot I am currently a senior partner managing corporate warfare. Richard and Thomas are arrogant, greedy men. I have waited 3 years for them to make a fatal error." He gestured toward the bank of monitors. "Today, Victoria Carver handed me the sword, and your husband provided the shield." Harrison clicked his mouse. The largest monitor in the center of the array woke up. It displayed the security feed from a camera mounted high on a discreet pole near his mailbox, pointed directly at the Carver patio. The resolution was staggering. Even through the falling snow, the picture was crystal clear. The playback started. I watched myself step out onto the patio. I watched the door shut. I saw myself turn around, knock on the glass, and hold my baby to my chest. Then Harrison zoomed in on a specific quadrant of the screen, the living room window of the Carver house. My breath caught. Through the sheer curtains, a silhouette stood perfectly still. The camera enhanced the contrast, revealing Bradley. He was holding a rocks glass, sipping a drink while he watched me shiver on the concrete. He was not trapped in another room. He was not unaware. He was spectating. The betrayal sliced through me, colder than the ice I had just escaped. Harrison paused the video. "The optics are damning," he said. "A jury would recoil. But legally, we have a gap. Without audio, Victoria will claim you walked out there by choice and the lock jammed. She will say she was trying to help. Bradley will claim he was looking at the snow, not at you. In a court in this county, with Chief Thomas Carver running interference, they will spin this into an unfortunate accident. We need sound. We need intent." My user experience training kicked into gear. I analyzed systems, data flows, and digital infrastructure for a living. I closed my eyes, visualizing the Carver smart home setup. "The Ring doorbell," I said, my eyes snapping open. "It records audio. It uploads directly to an Amazon Web Services cloud server." Harrison raised an eyebrow. "Can you access it?" "Bradley is the primary administrator," I explained, adjusting Leo in my lap. "He handles the Wi-Fi network and the security passwords. But I have a shared user profile. If Bradley realizes the legal danger he just put his family in, he will log into the dashboard and scrub the cloud storage to cover their tracks. He might be doing it right now. I need a device, I said, shedding the blanket from my shoulders. Right now. Harrison did not ask questions. He opened a desk drawer and slid a sleek iPad Pro across the leather blotter. My fingers flew across the cool glass. I bypassed the App Store and opened the Safari browser, navigating directly to the Amazon portal. I needed the desktop version of the site to bypass the mobile app restrictions. I typed in my email address. My hands shook, causing me to mistype a letter. I deleted it, forced myself to take a deep breath, and typed the password. A verification prompt popped onto the screen. 2-factor authentication. My phone was dead, lying somewhere on the Carver patio. Panic flared in my chest. Think, I muttered to myself. I clicked the alternative verification method, routing the security code to my backup email. I opened a new tab, logged into my secondary inbox, retrieved the 6-digit code, and pasted it into the portal. Access granted. I navigated the dashboard, my eyes scanning the dense rows of device settings. I found the tab labeled Home Security. I clicked it. A list of cameras populated the screen. Front gate, garage, foyer, back patio door. I tapped the icon. A chronological list of captured events loaded. I scrolled past the motion alerts triggered by the falling snow. I found the timestamp, 3:14 in the afternoon. I pressed play. The video buffered for an agonizing second. Then, Victoria's face filled the iPad screen, captured from the doorbell's fisheye lens. When you learn respect for the matriarch of this family, the door will open. Think about your attitude. The audio was pristine. Her malice echoed in Harrison's quiet study. I did not waste time watching the rest. I tapped the export button. A prompt asked where to save the file. I routed it directly to the iPad's internal hard drive and hit download. A blue progress bar appeared. 10%. 30%. 60%. My heart hammered against my ribs. I pictured Bradley sitting on the velvet sofa, his thumb hovering over the delete icon on his own phone, realizing the evidence hanging over his head. 90%. The file chimed. Download complete. Saved locally. I exhaled a ragged breath and refreshed the browser page just to check the server status. The screen blinked. The list of videos reloaded. The file from 3:14 was gone. In its place, a gray text box read, "Event removed by network administrator." Bradley had wiped it. He had scrubbed the cloud. But he was exactly 5 seconds too late. I locked the iPad screen and slid the device back across the desk toward Harrison. We have the audio. We have the video. We have the intent. Harrison stared at the silver tablet, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across his face. The predator had found his teeth. I have prosecuted monsters for 40 years, Donatella. He leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers. The ones who wear cashmere and sip fine scotch are the easiest to break. They believe their wealth makes them untouchable. They lack the resilience of street criminals. He tapped the iPad. With this, we can destroy their reputation. We can secure your son. We can file a civil suit for endangerment. Let us file it tomorrow, I said. I want them to pay. Harrison shook his head, his smile fading into a grim line. No. If we attack tomorrow, Richard will utilize his brother. They will freeze the local courts, claim the video as manipulated, and trap you in a protracted custody battle that will drain your resources for years. A cornered animal bites. We cannot just wound them. We must remove their teeth entirely. He stood up, walking toward the window overlooking the snowy street. To dismantle an empire like the Carver family, you do not attack their pride first. You attack their vault. We need to look at the money. We need to lay a trap so flawless they walk into it willingly. The mention of money sparked a new, unsettling thought in my mind. I had surrendered so much financial control to Bradley under the guise of marital trust. If Bradley was willing to let me freeze to appease his mother, what else was he doing behind my back? I reached for the iPad again, pulling up the login screen for my personal banking portal, unaware that the real devastation was waiting on the other side of a password. The tea in my mug had gone cold, but the chill spreading through my chest had nothing to do with the blizzard raging outside. Harrison's comment about attacking their vault echoed in the quiet study. I stared at the silver iPad resting on the leather desk blotter. I earned a lucrative salary at the tech firm. Since moving to Colorado, my paychecks were deposited into a high-yield savings account solely in my name. I had built that safety net long before I met Bradley on that beach in Maui. It was my independence, the financial cushion that allowed me to buy expensive plane tickets back to Hawaii whenever I felt homesick for the smell of the ocean. Bradley knew about the account. He knew the balance. I had set up a joint checking account for our household expenses, but the savings account was my territory. At least, it was supposed to be. The paranoia, newly awakened by the locked door on the patio, whispered a dark warning in my ear. If a man could sip a drink while his wife turned blue in the snow, what boundary would he respect? I pulled the iPad closer. I navigated to my primary banking portal. I typed in my credentials, my fingers moving mechanically. I cleared the security prompts, staring at the screen as the dashboard loaded. The white screen filled with data. Available balance, $1,214. My lungs seized. The air rushed out of me in a ragged gasp. I blinked, rubbing my eyes, convinced the screen was glitching. I refreshed the page. The numbers did not change. $85,000. Gone. I clicked on the transaction history tab. My hands were shaking so severely I almost dropped the tablet. The ledger populated. 3 days ago, a single outgoing wire transfer had emptied the account. The recipient field read, Carver Logistics Holding, LLC. The memo line stated, Family Trust Contribution. A sickening realization twisted in my gut. My in-laws had not just locked me out to teach me a lesson about respect. They were actively dismantling my ability to leave. They were systematically stripping me of the financial resources I would need to buy a plane ticket, hire a lawyer, or secure housing for Leo. They were turning me into a dependent, trapping me in their manufactured high society prison. Donatella, Harrison said, his voice cutting through my rising panic. What is it? I turned the iPad around, sliding it across the desk so he could see the screen. They took my money. All of it. 3 days ago. $85,000 wired into Richard's company account. Harrison leaned forward, adjusting his reading glasses. He studied the transaction ledger. His demeanor shifted instantly. The sympathetic neighbor vanished, replaced entirely by the ruthless corporate litigator. This account is solely in your name, he asked, his tone clipped and analytical. Yes, I replied, my voice shaking. Bradley is not an authorized user. I never signed a joint access form for the savings. Then this wire transfer is a physical impossibility, Harrison stated flatly. Retail banks do not authorize outward domestic wires of this magnitude to an LLC without a verified signature, a secondary authorization protocol, or an established power of attorney. A spouse cannot simply initiate this transfer over the phone. He tapped the screen, opening the digital receipt attached to the wire. A PDF document loaded. It was a scan of a formal authorization form submitted to the bank branch in downtown Denver. Harrison zoomed in on the bottom of the document. He turned the screen back to me. Look at the signature line. I stared at the messy, looping cursive ink on the digital scan. It spelled my name, but it was not my handwriting. It was a crude approximation, rushed and sloppy. That is not my signature, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. Look below it, Harrison instructed, pointing to the notary seal stamped in the corner of the page. I read the name on the black ink stamp. Gregory Vance, Notary Public. Gregory Vance, I repeated. The name sounded familiar. I dug through my memories of the tedious country club dinners I had endured over the past 2 years, the golf tournaments, the charity galas. He plays golf with Richard every Sunday, I said, the pieces snapping together. He is a real estate broker. He comes over for scotch in the study. Harrison sat back in his chair, removing his glasses. He let out a low, slow whistle. Gregory Vance. The man who brokers all the commercial land acquisitions for Carver Logistics. Harrison steepled his fingers, his eyes alight with a cold, predatory gleam. The situation just escalated from a domestic dispute into a federal jurisdiction. Bradley did not just steal your money, Donatella. He forged your signature on a financial instrument. Gregory Vance falsely notarized the fraudulent document, and Richard Carver accepted the stolen funds into a corporate LLC account under the guise of a tax shelter. This is not bad behavior, he continued, his voice steady and sharp. This is a multi-person conspiracy. It is felony wire fraud. It is corporate embezzlement. I sat back in the leather armchair, pulling the thermal blanket tight around Leo. My mind reeled. The magnitude of the betrayal was staggering. My entire marriage, the wedding in Maui, the invitation to move into the Colorado estate, it was not a union. It was an acquisition. They saw my tech salary as a revenue stream to prop up a failing logistics firm. They viewed me as a financial asset to drain and a domestic servant to control. If you have ever uncovered a financial betrayal hiding behind the word family, if you have ever realized your love was being monetized by the people you trusted most, drop a comment below, because sitting in that study, staring at the proof of my stolen life savings, I felt a rage so pure it burned away the last remnants of my fear. I want to call the FBI, I said, my voice hard and flat. I want to report the wire fraud right now. Harrison raised a hand, stopping me. Patience. If you report the fraud today, the bank will freeze the LLC account. Richard will immediately employ his brother Thomas to suppress the local investigation. Gregory Vance will claim you signed the document in his presence and that you are now lying due to a marital dispute. It will become a grueling, protracted legal battle, and the money will be tied up in litigation for years. He leaned across the desk, his eyes locking onto mine. We do not just want the money back, Donatella. We want to annihilate them. To do that, we need them to admit they possess the funds, in writing, in front of witnesses, in a venue where Thomas Carver cannot protect them. How? I asked. We play their game, Harrison said. The Carvers believe you are a naive, submissive island girl. They believe the locked door broke your spirit. We are going to let them believe they won. You are going to walk back into that house, apologize to Victoria, and play the role of the obedient daughter-in-law. I stared at him, horrified. You want me to sleep under the same roof as the man who stole my money and let me freeze? It is the Trojan horse strategy, Harrison explained, his tone uncompromising. You are not a victim returning to her abusers. You are an operative gathering intelligence inside enemy lines. I need you to access Bradley's computer. I need the email threads between him, Richard, and Gregory Vance coordinating the forgery. I need the tax documents showing the liquidity issues at Carver Logistics. We need the paper trail that proves the motive for the theft. He stood up and walked over to a locked filing cabinet. He retrieved a small, encrypted USB drive and handed it to me. Insert this into Bradley's laptop, Harrison instructed. It contains a self-executing script. It will silently mirror his hard drive to my firm's secure server. It bypasses commercial antivirus software. You only need to plug it in for 3 minutes. Can you do that? I took the small black drive. The metal felt cool against my palm. I was a UX designer. I built software pathways. Slipping a drive into an unlocked laptop was child's play. Yes, I said, I can do it. Harrison nodded. Good. Once we have the internal documents, we build the trap. We wait for the moment they feel most secure, the moment their pride is on full display, and we drop the guillotine. I stood up, holding Leo securely against my chest. The thermal blanket slipped from my shoulders, but the cold did not return. A new heat radiated through my veins, fueled by purpose. I looked down at the iPad one last time, staring at the zero balance in my account. They thought taking my money would render me powerless. They failed to realize they had just funded their own destruction. I pocketed the encrypted drive. I'm ready to go back, I told Harrison. He walked me to the front door. The blizzard had reduced to a steady, heavy snowfall. The wind had died down. The street was quiet, blanketed in pristine white, hiding the rot beneath the surface. I stepped out of the sanctuary. I did not wear the heavy wool coat. I needed to look freezing. I needed to look defeated. I wrapped the thin cashmere cardigan around my son and began the long walk back across the street, preparing to step back inside the cage to tear it apart from the inside. The walk back across the street felt like crossing a frozen ocean. The snow had stopped swirling, settling into a heavy, silent descent that blanketed Cherry Hills in a deceptive peace. I carried Leo tight against my chest, the thin cashmere cardigan offering no real warmth. I needed to look the part. I needed to look like a woman whose spirit had been shattered by the cold. I reached the front porch of the Carver estate. I did not go to the back patio. I stood under the bright, recessed lights of the main entrance, ensuring my face was clearly visible to the Ring doorbell camera. I slumped my shoulders. I let my jaw tremble. I pressed the illuminated button. The wait was agonizing. Seconds stretched into minutes. They were letting me stew, prolonging the punishment to ensure the lesson stuck. Finally, the heavy mahogany door swung open. Victoria stood in the foyer. She wore a pristine white silk blouse and tailored slacks, holding a crystal wine glass. The warmth of the house washed over me, carrying the scent of expensive cedarwood and roasting lamb. Victoria looked down at my bare, red feet, then up to my face. Her smile was small, tight, and profoundly smug. "Have we learned our lesson?" she asked, her voice a low, melodic purr. I swallowed the bile rising in my throat. I looked at the floor, forcing my voice to break. "I am sorry, Victoria. I lost my temper. I should not have spoken to you that way." She took a slow sip of her wine. "And the baby formula?" "Whatever you think is best," I whispered, clutching Leo closer. Victoria stepped aside, gesturing for me to enter with a sweeping, magnanimous motion. "Good girl. Come inside before you catch a chill." I stepped over the threshold. Bradley was sitting on the stairs leading to the second floor. He looked annoyed, like a parent dealing with a toddler throwing a tantrum in a grocery store. He stood up, shoving his hands into his pockets, and walked over to me. "See," he sighed, placing a heavy hand on top of my head, patting my hair as if I were a disciplined golden retriever. "Was that so hard, Donna? You just needed to cool off and see reason." I did not flinch. I leaned into his touch, playing the role of the chastised, dependent wife perfectly. "You were right, Bradley. I overreacted." He smiled, a wide, self-satisfied grin that made my stomach churn. The visceral disgust of standing next to a man who had stolen my life savings and watched me freeze was overwhelming. Every instinct screamed at me to hit him, to scream about the forged notary signature, to demand my money back. But Harrison's warning echoed in my mind. A cornered animal bites. I needed to keep them complacent. I was no longer a victim. I was an infiltrator. Over the next 3 days, the Carver household settled into a sickeningly triumphant rhythm. Victoria strutted through the halls, her matriarchal authority fully restored. Richard went back to his study, closing lucrative deals on the phone, likely funded by my stolen $85,000. Bradley went to work, confident he had finally broken his headstrong Hawaiian wife. I played my part. I smiled politely at breakfast. I let Victoria hold Leo whenever she pleased. I spoke softly and agreed with every ridiculous political or social opinion Richard offered at the dinner table. But beneath the submissive facade, I was laying the groundwork for their destruction. I needed to extract the financial records from Bradley's computer, but I needed a distraction to keep their eyes off my true movements. I needed a red herring. On Tuesday afternoon, while Victoria was hosting her weekly bridge club in the sunroom, I marched up the sweeping grand staircase. I made sure to stomp my feet just loudly enough to be heard. I went into the master bedroom, dragged my largest, most obnoxious hard-shell suitcase from the closet, and dragged it down the hall to the guest bedroom. I left the guest room door wide open. I began throwing clothes into the suitcase with dramatic, sweeping gestures. I tossed in sweaters, jeans, shoes, and a toiletry bag. I made sure to heave deep, theatrical sighs. Bradley walked past the room on his way to his home office. He stopped in the doorway, leaning against the frame, watching me pack. "What are you doing now, Donna?" he asked, rolling his eyes. I refused to look at him, folding a shirt with exaggerated aggression. "I need some space, Bradley. I am packing a bag. I am going to stay at the Marriott downtown for a few days to clear my head." Bradley laughed, a sharp, dismissive sound. "Right. You are going to storm off to a hotel. Do you even have a credit card that works?" The cruelty of the comment hit its mark. He knew he had drained my savings. He was mocking my financial dependence to my face. I zipped the massive suitcase shut and hauled it onto the floor. It hit the hardwood with a loud thud. "I will figure it out," I snapped, walking past him and heading downstairs. I spent the next 2 hours in the kitchen, organizing baby bottles. Later that evening, as I walked past Richard's study, the door was cracked open. I heard Victoria's voice, hushed and amused. "She packed her giant pink suitcase and left it in the guest room," Victoria chuckled. "Bradley says she is threatening to go to a hotel." "Let her pout," Richard replied, the clinking of ice against crystal punctuating his sentence. "She will realize she has no money and no friends in this state soon enough. The tantrum will burn itself out by the weekend." They had taken the bait. They believed the giant pink suitcase was my entire exit strategy, a loud, clumsy, emotional outburst that they could easily control. They lowered their guard completely. In reality, the massive suitcase in the guest room was filled with old winter coats, ripped jeans, and useless junk I had meant to donate months ago. My real go bag was already packed. It was a small black waterproof duffel. Inside were Leo's birth certificate, my passport, my social security card, a burner cell phone Harrison had provided, and 3 changes of clothes for my son. The night before, under the cover of darkness, I had slipped out the side door near the garage. I walked to the edge of the property where the sweeping driveway met the street. Thick, dense rhododendron bushes lined the brick retaining wall. I crawled into the snow, pushed apart the thick branches, and wedged the black duffel deep inside the foliage, completely hidden from view. If I needed to run, I did not need to lug a giant suitcase down the stairs. I just needed to grab Leo, walk down the driveway, retrieve the duffel from the bushes, and get into Harrison's waiting car. The decoy suitcase bought me the invisible, unsupervised time I needed inside the house. On Thursday morning, Bradley left for a golf outing with Gregory Vance, the notary who had forged my signature. Victoria went to a high society charity luncheon. Richard was at the corporate office. The house was empty. I put Leo down for a nap in his crib, ensuring the baby monitor was active. I walked down the hall to Bradley's home office. The door was unlocked. Bradley never locked it. He believed he was untouchable in his own castle. I sat at his heavy oak desk and woke up the monitor. A password screen greeted me. Bradley was a creature of habit. He lacked imagination. I typed in the name of his favorite golf course, followed by his birth year. The desktop loaded immediately. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small, encrypted USB drive Harrison had given me. My pulse quickened. If Bradley returned early, if the drive triggered an antivirus alarm, the entire operation would collapse. I took a breath, finding the calm, methodical focus I used when writing complex code for my UX job. I inserted the black drive into the USB port on the side of the tower. A small window popped up on the screen. Running diagnostic protocol, it read. Harrison's custom script executed silently in the background. The progress bar moved steadily across the screen, mirroring the contents of Bradley's hard drive, grabbing email archives, PDF downloads, and hidden tax folders, routing them directly to the secure servers at Harrison's law firm. I watched the bar hit 50%, 60%. Then, the heavy thud of the front door closing echoed up the staircase. My blood ran cold. "Donna?" Bradley's voice called out from the foyer. "The golf course is closed. Too much ice on the back nine. Where are you?" I stared at the screen. 80%. He was walking up the stairs. I could hear his heavy footsteps hitting the hardwood runners. The script was not finished. If he walked into the office and saw the mirroring software running, he would know I was stealing data. He would lock the doors. He would call his police chief uncle. I would never make it to the rhododendron bushes. 90%. The footsteps reached the second-floor landing. He was turning down the hallway toward the office. I had exactly 5 seconds to cover my tracks, and the panic rising in my chest threatened to paralyze me completely. 92%. The heavy, measured thud of Bradley's dress shoes moved down the carpeted hallway. He was 20 feet from the open office door. 95%. My heart battered against my ribcage, a frantic bird trapped in a small cage. The progress bar on the screen crawled forward with agonizing slowness. I could not yank the USB drive out. Interrupting the mirroring script mid-transfer would corrupt the data packets, rendering the financial evidence useless to Harrison. 15 feet. I could hear the rustle of his expensive windbreaker as he took off his jacket. I needed a diversion. My UX design training was rooted in visual manipulation, making users see exactly what I wanted them to see while hiding the complex machinery operating underneath. My fingers flew across Bradley's keyboard. I hit the shortcut keys to open a new virtual desktop, a feature built into the operating system that allowed multiple workspaces to run simultaneously. The screen snapped to a clean, blank slate. The mirroring script continued running invisibly on the hidden desktop beneath it. 10 feet. A blank screen was suspicious. I needed to populate it with something Bradley expected to see. I opened his web browser, accessed his bookmarks bar, and clicked the link for his ESPN Fantasy Football League. The page loaded instantly, displaying his current roster and weekly matchup stats. I hit F11, throwing the browser into full screen mode, hiding the taskbar and any indication that a USB drive was connected to the tower. 5 feet. I pushed the rolling leather chair back from the desk, dropped to my knees, and started frantically gathering scattered paper clips and stray pens from the floor, pretending to organize the mess near the trash can. Bradley walked into the office. He stopped in the doorway, frowning. "What are you doing in here, Donna?" I looked up, keeping my breathing even, projecting the mild annoyance of a busy housewife. I dropped a handful of paper clips into the mesh bin. "Cleaning," I said, standing up and brushing dust off my knees. "You left coffee mugs on the desk yesterday, and the vacuum robot missed the corners." Bradley's eyes darted past me, landing on his computer monitor. The fantasy football roster glowed brightly across the screen. The tension in his shoulders evaporated. He chuckled, stepping into the room and walking toward the desk. "Did you check my lineup?" he asked, sliding into the leather chair. "I need to swap out my running back." I moved to the side of the desk, positioning my body between his line of sight and the black USB drive protruding from the side of the tower. "No," I said smoothly. "I just bumped the mouse while wiping the desk down, and the screen woke up." A tiny muted chime sounded from the computer speakers. Bradley frowned, reaching for the mouse. What was that? I recognized the chime. The script was finished. The data transfer was complete. "Probably an email notification," I said, shifting my weight. I casually reached down, my hand brushing the side of the tower. My fingers found the USB drive. I pinched the textured plastic, depressed the release button, and pulled it free in one fluid motion, palming the drive inside my closed fist. Bradley clicked out of the full-screen browser, minimizing the fantasy football page. The desktop was clear. Nothing looked out of place. He leaned back in his chair, satisfied. "Thanks for cleaning," he muttered, already engrossed in an incoming email from his father. "Shut the door on your way out." I walked out of the office, pulling the heavy oak door shut behind me. The moment the latch clicked, my knees gave out. I sagged against the hallway wall, pressing the cold metal of the USB drive against my forehead. I had survived the encounter. I had the financial evidence. But the sheer terror of that near miss told me my window of opportunity was closing fast. The next morning, the severity of my situation escalated from a quiet financial trap into a loud public threat. I walked into the kitchen to make coffee. The granite counters were pristine, wiped clean by the housekeeper an hour earlier. But sitting directly next to the espresso machine, positioned so perfectly it could not be missed, was a glossy, trifold pamphlet. I picked it up. The Aspen Ridge Recovery Center, specialized care for postpartum mood disorders and severe behavioral health crises. My blood ran cold. The pamphlet detailed inpatient, locked facility treatment programs. Victoria walked into the kitchen, dressed in her tennis whites. She saw me holding the brochure. Her expression morphed into a mask of deep, tragic concern, a performance worthy of an Academy Award. "I know you are struggling, Donatella," she said, placing a gentle, condescending hand on my arm. "The incident in the snow, walking out there without a coat, endangering Leo, it frightened us terribly. Bradley and I just want you to get the help you need." I stared at her, the breath trapped in my lungs. She was not just rewriting history. She was building a paper trail. "I did not walk out there," I said, keeping my voice low and steady. "You locked the door, Victoria." Victoria sighed, a tragic, maternal sound. She squeezed my arm. "Oh, sweetheart, your mind is playing tricks on you. Sleep deprivation can cause terrible hallucinations. Dr. Evans at Aspen Ridge is wonderful. A few weeks in their inpatient program will clear your head." She turned and walked out the back door toward her waiting car. The message was clear. If I fought back, if I tried to leave, they would legally commit me. They would use the locked door incident, the very trauma they inflicted on me, as proof of my insanity. They would tell the courts I wandered into a blizzard in a fugue state. They had the police chief on their side. They had the money to hire expert witnesses. I would be trapped in a psychiatric ward while they gained full custody of Leo and kept my $85,000. If you have ever had an abuser try to convince the world you were crazy to cover their own tracks, if you have ever been gaslit so severely you started to doubt your own reality, type gaslight in the comments below. Because standing in that kitchen, looking at that mental health brochure, I realized I was not just fighting for a divorce. I was fighting for my freedom. I needed to know how far the smear campaign had spread. That afternoon, Victoria hosted a small gathering of her elite country club friends in the sunroom. They drank mimosas and picked at catered finger sandwiches. I stayed out of sight, sitting in the adjoining formal dining room, obscured by the heavy velvet drapes. The clinking of crystal glasses settled down, and Victoria's voice floated through the open archway. "It has been a nightmare," Victoria whispered loudly, her tone dripping with manufactured sorrow. "We are simply devastated." "Oh, Victoria," murmured a woman named Beatrice, the wife of a prominent local judge. "Is it really as bad as Richard said?" Worse, Victoria replied. Donatella has developed severe postpartum psychosis. Last week, during that terrible storm, she suffered a complete break from reality. She bundled Leo up and wandered out into the blizzard in a fugue state. Bradley had to practically break the door down to get her back inside. I pressed my hand over my mouth to stop the gasp from escaping. The audacity of the lie was breathtaking. She was painting Bradley as the heroic savior and me as the dangerous, unstable mother. "We are looking into residential treatment facilities," Victoria continued, her voice thick with fake emotion. "But it breaks my heart for Leo. A child needs stability. Bradley is looking into emergency custody provisions, just to ensure the baby is protected while Donatella gets the psychiatric help she desperately needs." The women murmured in sympathetic agreement, praising Victoria for her strength and resilience in the face of such a family tragedy. I backed away from the velvet drapes, my hands shaking with a lethal mixture of terror and rage. The preemptive strike was in full motion. They were planting seeds of doubt among the most powerful social circles in Denver. When I eventually fled, the narrative was already set. The crazy island girl had finally snapped and abandoned her family. I walked swiftly upstairs, retrieved the hidden burner phone from the bottom of Leo's diaper caddy, and dialed Harrison's direct line. He answered on the first ring. "I have the USB drive," I whispered urgently, "but we are out of time, Harrison. They are building a case to commit me. They are telling the country club I have postpartum psychosis. Bradley is looking into emergency custody." Harrison's response was calm, a steady anchor in the storm of my rising panic. I expected this. It is a classic narcissistic maneuver. Control the narrative before the victim can speak. "We need to drop the evidence now," I pleaded, "before they file court papers." "No," Harrison commanded. "If we act prematurely, they spin the evidence as paranoid delusions. We wait for the sip and see." The sip and see. Victoria had announced it days ago. A lavish, catered party scheduled for this coming Saturday, designed to formally introduce baby Leo to Denver's high society. Over 50 of Richard and Victoria's most influential friends, investors, and political allies were invited. "Why the party?" I asked, pacing the floor of the nursery. "Because," Harrison explained, his voice turning cold and precise, "an abuser's greatest weakness is their audience. They are spending this week convincing their elite friends that you are crazy and they are the saviors. When we drop the evidence, we do not do it in a quiet courtroom where records can be sealed. We do it in their living room, in front of the very people they are lying to. We use their own stage to execute them." The logic was flawless, but the waiting felt like walking a tightrope over a canyon. I hung up the phone, the countdown clock ticking loudly in my mind. I had to survive 3 more days of psychological warfare without breaking character. Completely unaware of the devastating legal trap Bradley was preparing to spring on me before the first guest even arrived. The preparations for Victoria's Sip and See event transformed the Carver estate into a gilded stage. Florists arrived at dawn, carrying towering arrangements of white orchids and pale blue hydrangeas. Caterers bustled through the kitchen, filling the air with the scent of roasted garlic and expensive truffles. Victoria orchestrated the chaos with the precision of a military general. To her, this gathering was not a celebration of her grandson's birth. It was a calculated display of her matriarchal dominance. She was presenting Leo to Denver high society as the newest crown jewel in her collection, a prize she controlled. I stayed out of her way, playing the role of the docile, broken daughter-in-law. I wore a conservative, high-necked navy dress Victoria had selected for me, sitting quietly in the nursery while she managed the staff downstairs. Every smile I offered, every polite nod, felt like swallowing sand. The physical toll of the performance weighed heavy on my bones, but the adrenaline humming through my veins kept my posture straight. 2 hours before the first guests were scheduled to arrive, the bedroom door opened. Bradley walked in, wearing a tailored charcoal suit that matched his father's. He closed the door behind him. The click of the latch echoed in the quiet room, a sound that instantly triggered the memory of the deadbolt locking me out in the blizzard. My spine stiffened, but I kept my hands relaxed in my lap. "We need to handle some family business before the party starts," Bradley said, his tone casual, as if he were discussing the weather. He walked over to the rocking chair and tossed a thick stack of legal-size paper onto the cushion beside me. The pages were bound by a heavy blue clip from his father's corporate law firm. "Read it," he instructed, leaning against the changing table and crossing his arms. I picked up the document. The thick, textured paper felt heavy in my hands. I read the header, printed in bold black ink. Post-Nuptial Agreement and Wealth Management Trust Charter. My stomach plummeted, but I forced my facial muscles to remain perfectly still. "What is this, Bradley?" "It is a standard wealth management protocol," he explained, his voice smooth and practiced. "My dad had his attorneys drafted up. Given the recent instability in our household, we decided it is best to formalize our financial and domestic structures. It protects the family legacy. It protects Leo." I turned to the second page, my eyes scanning the dense legal jargon. I did not need a law degree to understand the terms of my own surrender. The document demanded I relinquish all claims to my independent income. It routed my future earnings directly into a trust managed by Richard. But the most terrifying clause was buried on page 4. It required me to sign over primary legal and physical custody of Leo to Bradley, granting me only supervised visitation rights should our marriage dissolve. They were not just trying to control me, they were legally erasing my rights as a mother. "I cannot sign this," I whispered, letting my hands tremble just enough to sell my fear. "You are asking me to give up my son. You are taking everything." Bradley pushed off the changing table and stepped closer. He did not yell. He did not raise his voice. He delivered the threat with the terrifying calm of a man who believed he held all the cards. "You are going to sign it, Donna. You are going to sign it today. If you refuse, my dad will make a phone call to Chief Thomas Carver. We will have you placed under an involuntary psychiatric hold by this evening." He leaned down, placing his hands on the armrests of my chair, trapping me in place. His cologne smelled sharp and metallic. "Mom already told her friends about your little psychotic episode in the snow," he continued softly. "She told them how you wandered out into the freezing storm in a fugue state, endangering our child. We have the psychiatric brochures. We have the witnesses who heard Mom talking about your mental break. You will be locked in a ward and a judge will hand Leo to me before the weekend is over." The cruelty of his threat was breathtaking. He was weaponizing the trauma his mother had inflicted upon me, using my near-death experience on the icy patio as the ultimate leverage. He expected me to shatter. He expected me to cry, to beg, to fold under the suffocating weight of his blackmail. What Bradley did not know was that I had spent the previous evening sitting in my car down the street, speaking with Harrison on my burner phone. Harrison had predicted this exact move. "Narcissists are obsessed with securing their stolen assets on paper," Harrison had told me. "Richard knows he committed wire fraud. He knows the forged power of attorney is a fragile shield. He will try to legitimize the stolen funds by forcing you to sign a post-nuptial contract validating the transfer. When he hands you that contract, Donatella, you do not fight him. You embrace it." I remembered asking Harrison why on earth I would sign away my rights. Because, Harrison had explained, the moment they put the stolen money into a legal contract, they bypass the discovery phase of a lawsuit. They put in writing that they possess the funds. If you sign it under duress, the contract is void anyway. But their written admission of possessing the stolen money remains permanent. It is the final nail in their coffin. I sat in the nursery, looking up at Bradley's smug, expectant face. I channeled every ounce of my user experience training. I was dealing with an arrogant user. I needed to manipulate his interface. I needed to feed his ego until he walked blindly into the trap. I let a single tear spill over my eyelashes and roll down my cheek. I looked away, staring at the floor, playing the part of the defeated, broken woman. "You win," I whispered, my voice cracking perfectly. "I will sign it." Bradley exhaled a loud, triumphant breath. He stood up straight, brushing a piece of invisible lint from his suit jacket. "Good. I knew you would finally see reason. We can take care of it right now. I have a pen in my pocket." "No," I said, looking up at him with wide, tearful eyes. "Not in here." He frowned, his hand pausing inside his jacket. "What do you mean?" I stood up, clutching the heavy document to my chest. "I want to do it downstairs, during the party." Bradley stared at me, clearly confused by the deviation from his script. "Why?" "Because I need your parents to know I am committed to this family," I lied, my voice dripping with manufactured sincerity. "Victoria thinks I am disrespectful. Richard thinks I do not understand his legacy. If I sign this quietly in a back room, they will always doubt me. But if I sign it in front of their friends, if I make it a public declaration of my loyalty, they will finally accept me. I want to honor your father's legacy, Bradley. Let me do this the right way." I watched his mind process the suggestion. I watched his ego swell. The idea of his wife making a public, submissive display of loyalty in front of Denver's most powerful citizens was irresistible to him. It played perfectly into their narrative of the benevolent high society family taming the wild, difficult outsider. A slow, arrogant smile spread across Bradley's face. "That is actually a great idea, Donna. Mom will love that. Dad will be thrilled. It shows you are finally ready to be a real Carver." He reached out and tucked a stray strand of hair behind my ear. "We will do it right before the champagne toast. Have yourself ready." He turned and walked out of the nursery, leaving the door open behind him. I stood alone in the quiet room. The tear dried on my cheek. The facade of the submissive wife vanished, replaced by a cold, searing focus. I looked down at the legal document in my hands. I flipped to page 6, the financial disclosures section. There it was, printed in stark black and white. Asset declaration. Family trust contribution originating from Donatella Carver, valued at $85,000, surrendered to Richard Carver, LLC. They had put the wire fraud in writing. They had bound themselves to the crime, and they were about to celebrate my signature in front of 50 prominent witnesses. The postnuptial agreement was supposed to be my death warrant. Instead, it was their signed confession. The trap was locked. I set the document on the changing table and walked to the window. Outside, the snow had melted away, leaving the manicured lawns of Cherry Hills crisp and green. The first luxury sedans were turning into the sweeping driveway. Valets in crisp white shirts rushed to open car doors. Politicians, real estate developers, and wealthy socialites stepped out, carrying expensive gifts wrapped in silver paper, entirely unaware that they were arriving to witness a public execution. I smoothed the fabric of my navy dress. I checked the baby monitor to ensure Leo was sleeping safely. Then I turned and walked toward the stairs. It was time to join the party. It was time to set the stage for Harrison Sterling's arrival. And I needed to ensure my husband and his parents had no way to escape the digital guillotine suspended above their heads. I stepped out of the nursery and walked to the edge of the second-floor landing. The Carver estate buzzed with frantic energy below me. Caterers in crisp white aprons carried silver trays of hors d'oeuvres through the formal dining room. A hired string quartet was tuning their instruments in the conservatory, the sharp notes of a cello cutting through the low hum of conversation between the event planners. I gripped the mahogany banister. I looked down at the Persian runner lining the hallway, the imported Italian marble in the foyer, the crystal chandelier casting prisms of light across the walls. For 2 years, this display of wealth had intimidated me. I had felt like an imposter, A girl from Hilo who somehow slipped past the velvet ropes into a world where I did not belong. Now, staring at the opulence, I felt nothing but a cold, clinical detachment. This house was not a legacy. It was a mirage. Richard and Victoria funded their aristocratic theater by draining other people. They had stolen my savings to keep the lights on and the champagne flowing. Every silk drape and polished antique felt tainted, bought with the quiet desperation of those they exploited. The emotional closure washed over me. I mourned nothing. You cannot grieve the loss of a prison once you see the bars for what they truly are. I returned to the nursery and retrieved the burner phone hidden beneath Leo's stack of diapers. I opened the email application and loaded my inbox. 2 boarding passes glowed on the bright screen. Hawaiian Airlines Flight 42, departing Denver International Airport at 11:30 tonight. First class. I had routed the purchase through a secure proxy server using the last of my independent emergency cash. I walked to the window and looked down at the edge of the sweeping driveway. The thick rhododendron bushes sat undisturbed, their dark green leaves hiding the waterproof duffel bag I had stashed there nights ago. My physical exit was secured. Once the trap snapped shut, I would walk down that driveway, retrieve my bag, and disappear into the night. But before I could leave, I had to ensure my abusers could not escape the digital execution. Victoria and Richard loved to boast about their smart home infrastructure. They treated the integrated technology like a parlor trick to impress their country club friends. Bradley acted as the self-appointed systems administrator. He controlled the thermostats, the security cameras, and the entertainment modules directly from his phone. He bragged about the seamless connectivity, oblivious to the vulnerability it created. He forgot he had married a user experience designer whose entire career revolved around manipulating digital architecture. I opened my laptop on the nursery changing table. I connected to the local network and launched a terminal window. Black screen, blinking white cursor. The interface of truth. I did not need to hack the system from the outside. I was already inside the walls. I typed a series of commands, locating the IP address of the central router housed in Richard's basement study. Bradley had never bothered to change the factory default administrative credentials. The arrogance of the ignorant is always their downfall. I logged into the backend. I navigated to the device management dashboard. A list of connected hardware populated the screen. I found Bradley's primary smartphone and his tablet. I selected both devices and revoked their administrative privileges. I downgraded his user status to a guest profile, stripping his ability to alter network settings. I changed the master password to a random 16-character alphanumeric string, locking the system entirely. Next, I targeted the 85-inch ultra-high-definition smart television mounted above the fireplace in the formal living room. This was the stage where Harrison would project the evidence. I accessed the television's internal software. I disabled the wireless casting feature for every device except the specific USB port on the back of the panel. I went a step further, delving into the accessibility settings. I enabled a retail kiosk mode, locking the current input source. When Harrison plugged his flash drive into that television, the video would dominate the screen. The remote control would be useless. The power button on the television bezel would be disabled. Bradley would not be able to kill the feed from his phone. He could not disable the Wi-Fi network. The only way to stop the broadcast would be to physically tear the heavy television off the wall or cut the main circuit breaker in the basement. I had sealed the digital exits. The trap was watertight. I closed the laptop and picked up the burner phone again. I sent a single text message to Harrison. The stage is set. Network secured. See you soon. The reply arrived a moment later. I am putting on my tie. My associates are waiting in the lobby with the filings. We will arrive precisely at 4. I looked out the window, shifting my gaze across the street. Harrison's fortress stood silent and imposing. I pictured him inside, a veteran prosecutor preparing to deliver the final argument of a lifetime. He was not bringing a gun to a knife fight. He was bringing a legal firing squad. He had paralegals standing by, holding formal cease and desist orders, civil lawsuit filings, and the prepared complaints ready to be submitted to the Securities and Exchange Commission regarding the forged wire transfer. I set the phone down and walked into the adjoining master bathroom. I stood before the vanity mirror. The woman staring back at me did not look like a victim. She looked like a weapon. I had already put on the conservative, high-necked navy dress Victoria had selected for me, but now I perfected the details. I pinned my dark hair back into a flawless, severe twist. I applied a sharp coat of crimson lipstick, wiping away the pale, submissive gloss I had worn for the past 3 days. I strapped my expensive silver watch to my wrist, fastening the clasp with a decisive click. Every piece of clothing, every stroke of makeup served as armor. I was projecting the exact image of the obedient, high society wife they expected to see. A disguise worn to hide the predator lurking beneath. The doorbell chimed downstairs. The deep, melodic tone signaled the beginning of the end. I walked back into the nursery and lifted Leo from his crib. He was awake, his dark eyes wide and curious. I kissed his warm forehead, breathing in the scent of baby lotion and clean cotton. "We are going home soon, little one," I whispered against his soft skin. "I promise." I carried him out to the second-floor landing. The foyer below was filling with people. Women in designer dresses and men in tailored suits handed their cashmere coats to the hired valets. The air swelled with the sound of clinking champagne flutes and manufactured laughter. Victoria's voice rose above the din, greeting a local politician with exaggerated delight. Bradley stood near the sweeping staircase, shaking hands with a real estate developer, projecting the image of a successful patriarch. They were all playing their parts perfectly, entirely blind to the invisible noose tightening around their necks. I took a slow, deep breath, letting the oxygen fill my lungs. The fear that had plagued me since the blizzard was gone, replaced by a cold, electric anticipation. I was not preparing to attend a party. I was preparing to execute an empire. I adjusted my grip on my son, lifted my chin, and began the long walk down the stairs to deliver their ruin. The descent down the grand staircase felt like walking onto a theater stage where every actor but me was reading from the wrong script. The foyer thrummed with the low, steady hum of 50 people who dictated the economic and social currents of Denver. Men holding crystal tumblers discussed commercial zoning permits in hushed tones. Women, adorned in understated diamonds, exchanged strategic gossip. This was the Carver ecosystem, a world built on appearances, leverage, and the ruthless exclusion of anyone who did not fit the mold. As I reached the bottom step, Victoria materialized from the crowd. She wore a stunning sapphire blue gown that highlighted her pale eyes. She swooped in, her movements fluid and predatory, and practically snatched Leo from my arms before my feet even touched the Italian marble floor. "There is my beautiful grandson," Victoria cooed, her voice pitched perfectly to ensure maximum audibility for the surrounding guests. She turned away from me instantly, pivoting toward a cluster of women near the arched entrance to the living room. "Look at him, Beatrice. He has the Carver chin. Do you not agree?" I stood there, empty-handed, watching my mother-in-law parade my child around the room like a newly acquired accessory. She did not introduce me. She did not acknowledge my presence. I was the invisible vessel that had delivered her prize, and now my utility was exhausted. I moved into the formal living room. The string quartet played a bright, lively piece by Mozart, but the atmosphere felt heavy, suffocating under the weight of Victoria's manufactured narrative. I walked toward the catering station to grab a glass of sparkling water, forcing my face into a pleasant, vacant mask. "Oh, Donatella," a soft, pitying voice called out. I turned. A woman named Eleanor, the wife of the city's district court judge, stood beside me. She wore a pearl necklace and an expression of deep, tragic concern. She reached out and patted my forearm, her touch light and condescending. "Victoria told us what you have been going through," Eleanor murmured, leaning in close so the surrounding guests could not hear. "We are all so worried about you, dear. Postpartum struggles are nothing to be ashamed of. My own niece had a terrible time adjusting. You just need to listen to Bradley and get the rest you need. Do not fight the help they are offering." The audacity of the comment struck me like a physical blow. Victoria's smear campaign had worked flawlessly. These people, these pillars of the community, truly believed I was a fragile, unstable woman who had dragged her infant out into a blizzard during a psychological break. They believed Bradley was a saint for tolerating me. They looked at me with pity, completely blind to the fact that they were standing in a house funded by stolen money, drinking champagne paid for by the woman they were currently patronizing. "Thank you, Eleanor," I said, keeping my voice even, suppressing the urge to scream the truth. "I am doing exactly what I need to do today." Eleanor smiled, satisfied she had performed her charitable duty for the afternoon, and drifted back into the crowd. I watched Bradley across the room. He stood near the fireplace, directly beneath the massive smart television I had digitally locked an hour earlier. He was holding court with Gregory Vance, the notary who had forged my signature on the power of attorney document. The two men laughed, clinking their glasses together. They looked relaxed, confident, and utterly arrogant. They believed their fraud was buried deep under layers of legal jargon and social insulation. The hypocrisy of the entire scene was a thick, foul smoke filling my lungs. They were celebrating a baptism of control, preparing to bind me to a contract that would erase my rights as a mother and legitimize their theft. I gripped the stem of my water glass, letting the cold condensation ground me. At exactly 3:45, the string quartet stopped playing. Richard Carver stepped into the center of the living room. He held a crystal champagne flute in his right hand. He tapped the side of the glass with a silver spoon. The sharp, high-pitched chiming sound sliced through the ambient chatter. The guests turned their attention toward the patriarch. The room quieted, the elite crowd settling into a respectful silence. Richard stood tall, expanding his chest, soaking in the reverence of his peers. He waited a beat, ensuring every eye was fixed upon him before he began to speak. Friends, colleagues, family. Richard projected his voice with the polished resonance of a seasoned politician. Welcome. We gathered you all here today for a momentous occasion, the sip and see of my grandson, Leo Carver. But this gathering represents more than just an introduction. It is a celebration of legacy. He gestured toward Victoria, who stood near the grand piano, holding Leo so everyone could see him. She offered a gracious, practiced nod to the crowd. We live in uncertain times, Richard continued, pacing slowly across the Persian rug. The world outside these walls is often chaotic and unpredictable. But inside this house, we have built something enduring. We have built an institution founded on commitment, loyalty, and the unwavering strength of family bonds. I watched Gregory Vance nod sagely in agreement, swirling the scotch in his glass. The irony was so thick, it was almost tangible. The man who committed federal wire fraud was nodding at a speech about loyalty. Richard raised his glass higher. To ensure this legacy remains protected for Leo's generation and beyond, we are initiating a new family charter today. A wealth management protocol designed to secure our assets and solidify our devotion to one another. He turned his gaze toward me, pointing his glass in my direction. The crowd followed his lead. 50 pairs of eyes locked onto me. Donatella, Richard said, his tone shifting into a sickeningly benevolent register, we know the transition into our family has had its challenges. We know the past few weeks have been difficult for you. But today, by signing this charter, you are proving your dedication. You are showing us and everyone here that you are finally ready to truly join the Carver family." Victoria stepped forward, shifting Leo into one arm. She raised her own glass, her pale blue eyes locking onto mine with a look of pure, triumphant malice disguised as maternal warmth. "We are so blessed," Victoria announced to the silent room, "to have a family built on transparency, warmth, and absolute trust." I stared at her. The words hung in the air, a grotesque monument to their deception. Transparency, warmth, trust. She was declaring victory. She was cementing the narrative that they were the benevolent saviors, and I was the broken outsider finally submitting to their rule. The audience watching this unfold would be screaming at their screens, knowing the digital payload Harrison Sterling carried in his pocket was about to obliterate that exact sentence into dust. Bradley stepped into the center of the room. He held a leather folio containing the postnuptial agreement. He pulled a heavy gold Mont Blanc pen from the inside pocket of his suit jacket. He walked toward me, his chest puffed out, radiating the smug satisfaction of a man who believed he had finally conquered an unruly prize. He stopped in front of me, extending the folio and the pen. "Here you go, Donna," Bradley said softly, his voice carrying just enough volume for the front row of guests to hear. "Show them you belong here." The room held its collective breath. They expected me to lower my head, take the pen, and sign away my life. They expected the quiet, obedient submission they demanded from anyone who entered their sphere. I looked at the pen. I looked at Bradley's arrogant smirk. I looked past him, locking eyes with Victoria holding my son. I did not take the pen. I stepped around Bradley, moving deliberately toward the center of the room. I walked past Richard, approaching the small microphone stand set up near the string quartet for the speeches. I reached out, my fingers wrapping around the cool metal of the microphone shaft. I adjusted the height, the sharp feedback whine causing several guests in the front row to flinch. I looked out over the sea of tailored suits and designer gowns. The silence in the room shifted from respectful to tense. They sensed a deviation from the script. "I would love to sign your charter, Bradley," I said into the microphone, my voice echoing clear and calm through the massive living room. "But before we finalize any legal documents, I think we should start with a presentation on true family values first." I looked toward the heavy oak doors at the front of the house. The grandfather clock in the hallway began to chime, signaling the top of the hour. It was precisely 4 o'clock, and right on cue, the heavy brass latch of the front door turned. The final chime of the grandfather clock resonated through the foyer, a heavy metallic toll that hung in the sudden silence of the living room. 50 guests stared at me, their faces a mixture of confusion and polite concern. Bradley stepped forward, his smug smile faltering, reaching a hand out to grab my arm and pull me away from the microphone. Before his fingers could touch the fabric of my dress, the heavy oak double doors at the front entrance swung open with a violent, concussive thud. The sound shattered the quiet murmur of the party. Heads snapped toward the foyer. The hired valets standing near the coat check shrank back against the wall. Harrison Sterling stepped across the threshold. He did not walk into the house like a guest arriving late to a celebration. He entered like a general surveying a conquered territory. He wore a dark, impeccably tailored suit that seemed to absorb the light from the crystal chandelier above him. His posture was rigid, his silver hair swept back, his sharp, predatory eyes scanning the crowd. He exuded an aura of raw, uncompromising authority that only comes from decades of prosecuting the most dangerous individuals in the state and subsequently dismantling corporations in the civil sector. Behind him, 2 young men in identical gray suits stepped into the foyer. They were paralegals from his firm. Each carried a thick, formal leather briefcase. They took up positions flanking the entryway, standing like sentinels, blocking any potential exit. The atmosphere in the living room shifted instantly. The polite, high society condescension that had suffocated me all afternoon vanished, replaced by an electric, palpable dread. These were politicians, developers, and judges. They recognized a predator when one walked into their enclosure. A murmur rippled through the crowd. I saw Eleanor, the judge's wife who had patronized me earlier, pale dramatically. She gripped her husband's arm, taking a deliberate step backward. I looked at Richard Carver. The patriarch who had been boasting about transparency and trust moments ago was now staring at the foyer with an expression of sheer, unadulterated horror. All the color drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly, ashen gray. He knew exactly who Harrison Sterling was. Harrison was not just the neighbor across the street. He was the senior partner at the exact corporate law firm that held the primary oversight contracts for Carver Logistics. Richard's entire business infrastructure depended on the goodwill of the man currently standing in his hallway. Harrison did not wait for an invitation. He did not greet the hosts. He strode past the catering tables, moving through the sea of guests. The crowd parted for him instinctively, leaving a wide, clear path. He walked directly to the center of the living room, stopping in front of the massive brick fireplace. Above the mantel hung the 85-inch ultra-high-definition smart television, the very device I had spent the morning locking into a digital prison. "What is the meaning of this?" Richard finally managed to ask, his voice tight and breathless, stripped of its earlier booming resonance. "Harrison, this is a private family event." Harrison did not look at him. He reached into his breast pocket and produced a sleek silver USB flash drive. He located the primary input port on the side of the television bezel and slid the drive into place with a definitive click. Only then did he turn to face the room. "Richard, Victoria, Bradley," Harrison began, his voice bypassing the microphone entirely, yet filling every corner of the massive room. His tone was not loud, but it carried the chilling, measured cadence of a prosecutor delivering opening statements in a capital murder trial. "Donatella asked me to provide some visual aids regarding the new family charter you are so eager to sign today. She felt it was vital for your guests to understand exactly how this family manages its assets, and more importantly, how it manages its members." The silence that followed was absolute. No one breathed. No one moved. The string quartet had lowered their instruments, the cellist staring wide-eyed at the scene unfolding before them. Victoria, standing near the piano with Leo still in her arms, let out a high, thin laugh. It was a desperate, brittle sound, an attempt to reassert control over a narrative that was rapidly unraveling. "Oh, Harrison," Victoria trilled, stepping forward, forcing her lips into a rigid smile. "You always had such a flair for the dramatic. We are in the middle of a toast. Whatever neighborhood dispute you want to discuss, surely it can wait until after the party. Let us not bore our guests with zoning complaints." She waved her free hand dismissively, gesturing for Bradley to intervene. Bradley moved quickly, stepping between Harrison and the television. He reached up, his hand hovering over the power button on the side of the screen. "Dad is right, Mr. Sterling," Bradley said, puffing his chest out, trying to project authority. "You need to leave, now, or I will call my uncle and have you removed for trespassing." Harrison did not step back. He looked at Bradley with an expression of profound, clinical disgust, the way a scientist might look at a particularly foul insect under a microscope. "Call him," Harrison challenged softly. "Call the chief of police." "I would love for Thomas to be present when I submit the felony fraud complaints to the state attorney general's office. In fact, I have a paralegal waiting to hand-deliver his copy of the indictment." Bradley froze. His hand dropped away from the television. The word felony hung in the air, a toxic cloud that sent a visible shudder through the crowd. Gregory Vance, the notary standing in the front row, took a sudden, jerky step backward, spilling his scotch onto the Persian rug. Harrison turned away from Bradley, dismissing him entirely. He pulled a small black remote control from his pocket. It was not the television remote. It was a dedicated presentation clicker synced directly to the USB drive. A family built on transparency, warmth, and absolute trust, Harrison repeated, throwing Victoria's sickening toast back at her. A fascinating claim. Let us examine the evidence. He pressed the button on the clicker. The massive screen above the fireplace flickered to life. The default screensaver vanished. The display flashed black for a fraction of a second before resolving into a stark, ultra-high-definition video feed. The brilliant colors of the party around us were suddenly juxtaposed against the grim, icy grayscale of a Colorado blizzard. The image on the screen was undeniable. It was the security footage from Harrison's specialized camera pole capturing the Carver patio. The resolution was so sharp you could see individual snowflakes whipping across the concrete. And standing in the center of the frame, shivering violently, was me. The guests in the living room leaned forward, their brows furrowing in collective confusion. They recognized the patio. They recognized the thin cashmere cardigan I was wearing. They saw me holding a tiny bundle tight against my chest. Harrison pressed the clicker again. The audio track, the file I had pulled from the Ring doorbell cloud server just seconds before Bradley wiped it, synced perfectly with the video feed. The sound of the howling wind filled the living room, a harsh, freezing roar that seemed to lower the temperature of the entire house. Then, the audio cut through the storm, crisp, clear, and dripping with malicious intent. When you learn respect for the matriarch of this family, the door will open. Think about your attitude. Victoria's voice, unmistakable, cruel, delivered while a mother and a newborn baby stood trapped in 14 below zero wind chill. The reaction from the crowd was instantaneous and visceral. The elite guests, the women who had pitied me, the men who had praised Richard's leadership, recoiled physically. A collective gasp, sharp and horrified, rippled through the room. Eleanor, the judge's wife, covered her mouth with both hands, her eyes wide with shock as she stared at Victoria. The video continued playing. The screen showed me turning around, pounding my fist against the frosted glass of the back door, pleading for help. The sound of my knuckles hitting the wood was a hollow, desperate thud that echoed in the dead, silent living room. Victoria's face crumpled. The mask of the benevolent matriarch shattered completely, replaced by naked, panicking terror. She looked around the room, meeting the eyes of her friends, her peers, her social lifeline. They were not looking back at her with sympathy. They were looking at her with revulsion. "No," Victoria stammered, taking a step backward, clutching Leo tighter. That is out of context. She was having an episode. We were trying to contain her. It is a fake video." "Turn it off," Richard bellowed, his voice finally returning, thick with panic. "Bradley, turn that damn thing off right now." Bradley lunged for the television again, desperate to kill the feed, completely unaware that his technological arrogance had already sealed his fate, and that the video was only the opening act of their destruction. Bradley threw himself toward the fireplace mantel, his polished leather shoes slipping slightly on the Persian rug. He jabbed a frantic finger at the power button located beneath the bezel of the massive screen. He pressed it once, twice, a dozen times in rapid succession. Nothing happened. The indicator light remained solid blue. The screen stayed bright. On the display, the footage shifted. The security camera perspective vanished, replaced by a stark, high-contrast image of a smartphone screen. It was a screenshot, captured and magnified to 85 inches. The text bubbles were undeniable. "Stop causing drama, Donna. Just apologize to my mom." It's not that cold. The timestamp in the corner of the message read 3:17 p.m., the exact moment I had been standing barefoot in the snow. A low, horrified murmur swept through the room. The men who had been shaking Bradley's hand earlier, congratulating him on his fatherhood, now stared at him as if he had brought a contagious disease into the room. "Unplug it," Richard roared, his voice cracking with desperation. He pointed a trembling finger at the wall behind the screen. "Yank the cord, Bradley." Bradley dropped to his knees on the hearth, ignoring the soot dusting his expensive suit pants. He reached his hands behind the flat panel, feeling for the power cable routed through the wall cavity. At the same moment, Victoria began to hyperventilate. Her chest heaved, the sapphire silk of her gown rising and falling erratically. She looked at the faces of her friends, the women she had spent the entire week poisoning with lies about my mental health. She saw Beatrice, the judge's wife, actively pulling her husband toward the foyer, seeking an exit. "It is a lie," Victoria shrieked, her voice shrill and desperate, shattering her carefully cultivated aristocratic persona. "It is a fake video. Donatella doctored it. She works with computers. She made a deep fake to ruin us. Tell them, Richard. Tell them she is crazy." Harrison Sterling did not raise his voice to compete with her screaming. He simply stepped sideways, placing his large frame directly in front of the fireplace, blocking Bradley's access to the wall outlet. "Move," Bradley snarled, his face flushed dark red, his composure entirely gone. He scrambled to his feet, pulling his smartphone from his pocket. "I am the network administrator. I am shutting down the entire house router." I watched him from my position near the microphone stand, a cold, clinical satisfaction blooming in my chest. I watched his thumbs fly across his screen, pulling up the smart home application. I watched the confident, arrogant swagger drain from his body as the application loaded. He tapped the icon to disable the living room Wi-Fi node. An error message flashed on his screen. I could not read the small text from across the room, but I knew exactly what it said. "Access denied. User privileges revoked by master administrator." Bradley stared at his phone, his mouth falling open in a slack-jawed expression of profound confusion. He tapped the screen again, harder this time. He tried to access the main router dashboard. Access denied. He tried to reboot the system remotely. Access denied. He looked up, his eyes darting frantically around the room until they locked onto mine. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The submissive wife packing her bags in the guest room had been a phantom. The woman standing before him had hijacked his digital kingdom while he was playing golf. "You," Bradley breathed, the word carrying a mixture of awe and terror. "What did you do?" I did not answer him. I did not need to. The silence in the room, save for the howling wind still playing from the television speakers, provided all the context required. Harrison turned his back on Bradley, dismissing the panicked husband as irrelevant. He faced the crowd of Denver elite, his posture straight, his presence dominating the space. "That," Harrison announced, gesturing to the text messages still glowing on the screen, "is Exhibit A. It establishes a clear, documented pattern of physical endangerment, emotional abuse, and premeditated gaslighting designed to isolate a mother from her child. It also entirely dismantles the fiction that Donatella Carver is suffering from any form of mental instability." He paused, letting his gaze sweep across the front row of guests. He made direct eye contact with Gregory Vance, the notary. Gregory swallowed hard, a bead of sweat tracing a line down his temple. The social execution was agonizingly slow and incredibly thorough. The guests were no longer just observers, they were hostages to the truth. They had come to celebrate a high society milestone, and instead, they were witnessing the unmasking of monsters. They realized they had been manipulated, used as pawns in Victoria's smear campaign. The pity they had offered me earlier curdled into deep, visceral disgust directed entirely at their hosts. But physical endangerment, while abhorrent, is a difficult charge to prosecute without physical injury, Harrison continued, his voice taking on the rhythmic, hypnotic cadence of a master litigator building a bulletproof case. He pressed the clicker in his hand. The screen shifted again. The text messages vanished. A stark white document appeared on the 85-inch display. The contrast was harsh, clinical, and impossible to ignore. It was a digital scan of a banking ledger. "So," Harrison said, lowering his voice slightly, forcing the room to lean in to hear him, "let us move to Exhibit B." I watched Richard Carver sway on his feet. He reached out, gripping the back of a velvet armchair to steady himself. His knuckles turned white. He recognized the document on the screen. It was the internal ledger for Carver Logistics Holding, LLC. 3 days ago, Harrison stated, projecting the facts into the suffocating silence, a sum of $85,000 was wired from a retail savings account into the corporate holdings of Richard Carver. This money represented the entirety of Donatella's independent life savings. A murmur of disbelief rippled through the crowd. This was no longer a domestic dispute about a locked door. This was money. In this room, among these people, money was a sacred, untouchable entity. Stealing it was a cardinal sin. The transfer was categorized as a family trust contribution, Harrison continued, pacing slowly in front of the fireplace. A convenient designation. However, retail banks require strict authorization for outward domestic wires of this magnitude. A spouse cannot simply initiate the transfer. They require a signature. They require a legal mechanism. He clicked the remote again. The ledger vanished, replaced by a high-resolution scan of the power of attorney document. The forged signature, crude and sloppy, dominated the top half of the screen. "My client did not sign this document," Harrison declared, his voice ringing with absolute certainty. She was not present when it was drafted. She was unaware of its existence until yesterday. Richard tried to speak. He opened his mouth, but only a dry, raspy wheeze escaped his throat. He looked toward his business partners scattered throughout the crowd. He was searching for an ally, a friendly face, someone to offer him the benefit of the doubt. He found nothing but cold, judging stares. The men who controlled the supply chains and investment portfolios of Denver were calculating their own liability. They were doing the math, realizing that if Richard Carver was willing to steal from his own daughter-in-law, their investments in his logistics firm were in grave danger. This document, Harrison said, pointing a long finger at the bottom corner of the screen, was falsely notarized to bypass banking security protocols. He zoomed in on the image. The black ink stamp filled the display. Gregory Vance, Notary Public. Every head in the room swiveled toward the front row. Gregory Vance stood frozen, his face a mask of sheer panic. He looked like a deer caught in the headlights of an oncoming semi-truck. "That is a lie," Gregory squeaked, his voice cracking. "Richard told me she signed it at home. He told me it was a formality for a tax shelter. I was just doing a favor for a friend." Gregory's desperate attempt to pass the blame was the final nail in the coffin. He had just confessed to notarizing a document without the signatory present. He had admitted to participating in the fraud. "A favor for a friend," Harrison repeated, tasting the words, his tone laced with venomous sarcasm. "A favor that constitutes a multi-person conspiracy, a favor that meets every legal definition of felony wire fraud and corporate embezzlement." The atmosphere in the living room collapsed. The high society gathering incinerated in real time. The guests were no longer backing away slowly. They were actively fleeing the blast zone. Eleanor grabbed her coat from a nearby chair and marched toward the foyer without looking back. A prominent city councilman pulled his wife toward the side exit, muttering about distancing himself from the scandal. The Carver empire was burning, the flames fueled by their own arrogance and ignited by the very technology they boasted about. But Harrison was not finished. He turned toward Bradley, who was still holding the postnuptial agreement, his hands trembling visibly. "And now," Harrison said, his eyes locking onto my husband, "we must address the contract you so eagerly wanted Donatella to sign today. The document designed to legitimize your theft and erase a mother's rights. The trap I had laid in the nursery was about to snap shut, and the financial guillotine suspended above the Carver family was preparing to drop. Bradley stood frozen, staring at the leather folio in his hands as if it were a live grenade. The postnuptial agreement he had shoved at me in the nursery, the document intended to strip my maternal rights and bind my future earnings to his father's failing company, now felt like a block of lead. His knuckles paled as his grip tightened on the padded cover. I walked toward him. My footsteps sounded impossibly loud against the hardwood floor. I reached out, my fingers wrapping around the edge of the folio. He did not resist when I pulled it from his grasp. I took the gold pen he still held in his other hand. The metal felt warm, heated by his nervous sweat. I flipped the thick pages, bypassing the custody clauses and the income routing stipulations, turning directly to page 6, the financial disclosures section. "What are you doing?" Bradley whispered, his voice trembling, barely audible over the stunned whispers of the remaining guests. I pressed the nib of the pen against the signature line at the bottom of the page. I signed my name with sharp, deliberate strokes. The ink flowed dark and permanent. "I am giving you exactly what you wanted," I replied softly, handing the open folio to Harrison. Harrison took the document, holding it high for the room to see. For those wondering why my client just signed a contract drafted by her abusers, Harrison announced, his tone ringing with supreme legal triumph, "allow me to explain the mechanics of a confession." He pointed to the specific paragraph I had just endorsed. In this document, Richard and Bradley Carver required Donatella to acknowledge the transfer of $85,000 into the Carver Logistics holding account. They classified it as a voluntary family contribution to legitimize the wire fraud we just exposed on that screen. Richard swayed on his feet, his eyes locked on the leather folio. His business acumen, usually sharp when bullying local contractors, finally caught up to the reality of the situation. "By drafting this contract and by accepting her signature today," Harrison continued, his voice echoing with finality, "Richard Carver has put in writing that his holding company is in current possession of stolen funds. He bypassed the entire legal discovery process. We do not have to spend months subpoenaing bank records or fighting injunctions to prove where the money went. The patriarch of this family just provided a signed confession of corporate embezzlement." The guests who had lingered near the edges of the room began murmuring with renewed intensity. In the cutthroat arena of Denver high society, financial incompetence was a fatal flaw. Documenting your own financial crimes and presenting them at a social gathering was a level of hubris that invited instant ostracization. The men who had invested in Carver Logistics were already reaching for their phones, drafting emails to their own legal teams. Harrison turned his attention fully to Richard. He gestured to the paralegal standing near the archway. The young man stepped forward briskly, carrying a thick, sealed manila envelope. He extended it to Richard. Richard did not take it. He kept his hands glued to the back of the velvet armchair, his chest heaving. The paralegal placed the heavy envelope on the glass coffee table, right beside the crystal bowl Victoria had tried to use to feed my son hours earlier. Inside that envelope, Harrison stated, detailing the execution, you will find 3 items. The first is a civil lawsuit filed in district court for fraud, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and gross endangerment of a minor. The second is a formal notification. Given the evidence of forged financial instruments moving through your corporate accounts, my firm is legally obligated to report this transaction to the Securities and Exchange Commission. An impending audit of your entire logistics network will begin by the end of the week. Richard let out a strangled, breathless sound. An SEC audit was the ultimate death sentence for a company built on smoke and mirrors. Every inflated expense, every phantom asset they used to maintain this sprawling mansion would be dragged into the unforgiving light of federal scrutiny. And the third item, Harrison concluded, his expression shifting into a mask of pure professional detachment, is a notice of termination. Effective immediately, my firm no longer represents Carver Logistics in any legal capacity. We are dropping you as a client. Good luck finding a reputable defense attorney willing to touch a radioactive ledger. The financial execution was sealed. The foundation of their aristocratic theater crumbled into dust. They had no legal counsel, no hidden funds, and a federal audit looming on the horizon. The reality of his ruined future finally snapped Bradley out of his stunned paralysis. The fake executive title he held at his father's company, the country club memberships, the easy wealth he had coasted on his entire life, it was all vanishing. "Donna, wait," Bradley pleaded. His voice cracked, stripping away the arrogant facade he had worn since I met him. He lunged forward, his hands shot out, his fingers closing tightly around my upper arm. His grip was frantic, digging into the fabric of my navy dress. "You cannot do this. We are a family. I am your husband. We can fix this. Just talk to me." The physical contact sent a jolt of revulsion straight to my core. I did not shrink away. I did not look to Harrison for protection. The island girl who used to swallow her pride to keep the peace was gone, replaced by a mother forged in ice. I ripped my arm out of his grasp with a sharp, forceful twist. He stumbled forward, caught off balance by my sudden resistance. "You let our son turn blue in the snow to appease your mother," I said. My voice rang clear, cold, and loud enough for every remaining person in the room to hear. "You do not get to touch me ever again." Bradley shrank back as if I had struck him across the face. He looked at his empty hands, the realization dawning that his control over me had evaporated entirely. I turned away from him, my gaze locking onto Victoria. My mother-in-law stood frozen near the grand piano. The matriarch who had orchestrated this entire nightmare looked small, fragile, and utterly defeated. Her sapphire gown suddenly seemed absurd, a theatrical costume worn by an actor who forgot her lines. She was clutching Leo to her chest, her arms trembling so severely I feared she might drop him. I closed the distance between us in 3 long strides. Victoria did not attempt to step away. She did not offer a defiant glare or a sharp insult. She simply stared at me, her pale blue eyes wide with the hollow, vacant shock of a monarch watching her kingdom burn. I did not ask for permission. I reached out and took my son from her trembling arms. Leo settled against my chest, his warmth seeping through the fabric of my dress. I secured my hold on him, feeling the steady, rhythmic beat of his tiny heart. He was safe. The primary objective was achieved. Victoria opened her mouth, her lips parting as if she wanted to offer an apology, or perhaps plead for mercy. No words came out. I did not give her the satisfaction of a final parting insult. Silence is a weapon that inflicts far more damage than screaming. I simply turned my back on her. I turned my back on Bradley, standing humiliated near the fireplace, and Richard, hyperventilating over the manila envelope on the coffee table. I walked toward the foyer, the path clearing as the remaining guests stepped aside, their eyes lowered in a mix of shame and fear. The air in the house felt different now, no longer stifling, no longer heavy with their manufactured authority. The prison doors had blown wide open. The heavy oak doors of the Carver estate swung open, not with the violent force of Harrison's arrival, but with the smooth, quiet certainty of my departure. I stepped out onto the sweeping front porch. The frigid Colorado air hit my face, crisp and sharp, but it no longer felt like an enemy. It felt like oxygen. I did not look back. I did not need to see the ashes settling over the living room to know the fire had consumed everything they valued. I walked down the wide, curved driveway, the heels of my shoes clicking a steady rhythm against the concrete. The line of luxury sedans belonging to the fleeing guests was already beginning to move. Valets scrambled to retrieve keys, their faces pale as they overheard the frantic, hushed conversations of the departing elite. A city councilman brushed past me, power-walking toward his Mercedes, his phone already pressed to his ear as he barked orders to his public relations manager. They were scattering, desperate to put as much distance as possible between themselves and the radioactive fallout of the Carver family. I reached the bottom of the driveway where the brick retaining wall met the street. The dense, dark leaves of the rhododendron bushes rustled slightly in the breeze. I reached deep into the foliage, my fingers finding the familiar, rough canvas strap of my waterproof duffel bag. I pulled it free, hoisting the heavy bag onto my shoulder while keeping Leo secure against my chest. A sleek black town car idled at the curb. The engine purred quietly. Harrison Sterling stood by the open rear passenger door. He had exited the house moments before me, leaving his paralegals inside to ensure Richard understood the gravity of the filings. Harrison did not offer a comforting smile. He simply nodded, stepping back to give me room. "The airport," I said, my voice steady. He closed the door behind me, sealing me into the quiet, leather-scented interior of the car. He slid into the front passenger seat, tapped the glass partition, and the driver pulled away from the curb. I looked out the tinted window as the imposing silhouette of the Carver mansion shrank in the distance. The place that was supposed to be my home, the fortress they used to break my spirit, disappeared behind a line of pine trees. I pulled my phone from the duffel bag and checked the time. 6:15. My Hawaiian Airlines flight boarded in exactly 4 hours. By the time the last terrified guest cleared the driveway in Cherry Hills, Leo and I were walking through the security checkpoint at Denver International Airport. By the time Victoria collapsed onto her Persian rug in a puddle of tears and ruined social capital, our plane was taxiing onto the runway, and when the landing gear lifted off the tarmac, launching us into the dark sky, I finally let out the breath I had been holding for 2 years. We were gone. The physical escape was complete. But the machinery Harrison and I had set in motion continued to grind forward, executing a relentless, systemic dismantling of my abusers' lives over the next month. The immediate fallout hit Richard's company first. In the brutal, unforgiving arena of corporate logistics, trust is the only currency that matters. The men who had witnessed the video drop at the party did not hesitate. By Monday morning, 3 of Richard's largest investors initiated emergency clauses to withdraw their capital funding. The rumor mill in Denver high society is highly efficient. The story of the forged power of attorney and the stolen $85,000 spread through the country club locker rooms faster than a wildfire. No one wanted their portfolios tied to a man facing a federal fraud investigation. Without the influx of investor capital, Carver Logistics could not meet its operational overhead. Delivery fleets sat idle. Warehouse leases went unpaid. Richard attempted to secure emergency bridge loans, but the banks took one look at the impending Securities and Exchange Commission audit and slammed their doors shut. His empire did not crumble slowly. It imploded in a matter of weeks. Victoria's destruction was entirely social, which, for a narcissist of her caliber, was a fate far worse than financial ruin. She attempted to attend her weekly bridge game at the country club 4 days after the party. The club manager met her in the lobby. He politely, firmly, informed her that her membership had been suspended pending a review by the ethics committee. Her friends, the women she had weaponized against me, stopped returning her calls. They blocked her number. When she walked into a high-end boutique in Cherry Creek, the other patrons actively turned their backs on her. She became a pariah, a toxic entity exiled from the very ecosystem she used to rule. But the true poetic justice, the flawless, morally satisfying conclusion to their cruelty, arrived on a Tuesday morning via the federal government. The SEC audit moved with terrifying speed, spurred by the pristine paper trail Harrison had handed them. Federal investigators traced the forged wire transfer directly into the LLC accounts holding the title to the Carver estate. They discovered that Richard had not only stolen my money, but he had been systematically commingling corporate funds with personal assets for years to maintain their lavish lifestyle. When federal agencies uncover felony wire fraud tied to primary residences, they do not issue polite warnings. They deploy asset forfeiture protocols. I received the details from Harrison during one of our weekly phone check-ins. I was sitting on my lanai in Oahu, the warm tropical breeze rustling the palm trees, listening to the veteran lawyer describe the final blow. Federal agents arrived at the Carver mansion at 8 in the morning, Harrison reported, his voice vibrating with a grim, professional satisfaction. They executed a complete freeze on all of Richard and Bradley's financial accounts, checking, savings, retirement portfolios, everything. I sipped my coffee, looking out at the turquoise water of the Pacific Ocean. And the house? Because the stolen funds were used to service the mortgage, the property was classified as an asset derived from criminal activity, Harrison explained. The bank initiated an immediate, accelerated foreclosure based on the federal seizure. The agents gave them exactly 1 hour to vacate the premises. I pictured the scene playing out in my mind, the flashing lights of the federal vehicles parked in the sweeping driveway, the stern, uncompromising faces of the agents standing in the foyer. Victoria had cried, Harrison told me. She begged the agents to let her pack her jewelry, her designer clothes, her antique vases. They refused. They allowed each resident to pack 1 standard suitcase of basic necessities. Nothing of value could leave the property. They locked the doors, Harrison concluded. They changed the deadbolts and posted federal seizure notices on the windows. Richard, Victoria, and Bradley were escorted off the property. They had no access to their bank accounts. They had no cars, as the vehicles were leased through the defunct company. They were forced to stand on the sidewalk, holding cheap suitcases with absolutely nowhere to go. The symmetry of their punishment was a masterpiece of karmic retribution. They had locked me out in the freezing cold to teach me a lesson about respect. They had weaponized their home to make me feel powerless. Now, they were literally locked out of their own mansion by the federal government. They were stripped of their wealth, their status, and their shelter, forced to stand on the concrete with nothing but the clothes on their backs, staring at a locked door they could never open again. Bradley's fake executive title was useless. He could not rely on his father's money or his mother's social connections to save him. He was broke, humiliated, and facing his own indictment for his role in coordinating the forged notary signature. He moved into a cheap weekly rental motel near the highway, taking a job working the graveyard shift at a regional shipping warehouse just to afford groceries. The man who had mocked my tech career was now loading boxes onto pallets for minimum wage. They had tried to bury me under the weight of their arrogance. They had tried to erase my identity and steal my future. Instead, they had dug their own graves, signed their own confessions, and handed me the shovel. The storm they created had finally passed, leaving them ruined in its wake, while I stepped out into the sun, entirely untouched by the wreckage. 6 months have passed since I walked down that icy driveway in Cherry Hills. Today, the temperature in Hilo is a perfect 82 degrees. I am sitting on the wooden deck of my lanai, watching the late afternoon sun turn the Pacific Ocean into a sheet of glittering copper. The air smells of sea salt and blooming plumeria. A warm trade wind brushes against my bare shoulders. There are no thin cashmere sweaters here. There is no biting frost. There is only the steady, comforting rhythm of the tide washing against the black volcanic rock lining the shore. I look down at my feet resting on the sun-baked cedar planks. They are warm. They are grounded. They are home. Leo is sitting on a woven mat beside my chair. He is 6 months old now, plump and vibrant. He reaches for a brightly colored wooden block, his tiny fingers grasping it with newfound coordination. He babbles happily, a sound so full of innocent joy, it fills every corner of my heart. He will never know the sterile, suffocating silence of the Carver estate. He will never be used as a pawn to manipulate obedience or feed a fragile ego. He is growing up surrounded by loud, chaotic, unconditional love. My aunts and uncles visit every weekend, filling the house with music and laughter. Leo is protected by a mother who learned the hard way that true safety requires ruthless boundaries. The legal machinery Harrison Sterling set in motion concluded its work 2 months ago. The civil lawsuit did not even reach a courtroom. Faced with the crushing weight of the federal audit and the undeniable proof of wire fraud, Richard's defense attorneys urged him to settle out of court immediately. They liquidated their remaining untainted assets from a secondary holding company to repay my stolen $85,000 in full, plus extensive damages for emotional distress and legal fees. The money was wired back into my secure personal account. I used a portion of those returned funds to place the down payment on this very house. It is a modest, beautiful property perched on a lush hillside overlooking the bay. I did not just recover my stolen assets. I used their money to buy my freedom. Bradley attempted to call me exactly once. It was a restricted number. I answered, thinking it was my project manager at the tech firm. Bradley sounded exhausted, his voice stripped of the arrogant swagger he used to wear like a second skin. He told me he was living in a cheap motel. He told me he missed his son. He asked if we could try counseling. I did not yell at him. I did not list his failures or remind him of the cold, concrete porch. I simply hung up the phone and forwarded the call log to Harrison, who immediately secured a permanent restraining order. A boundary is only effective if you enforce it without hesitation. The man who watched me freeze does not get a second chance to burn me. My career thrived in the aftermath of my escape. The UX firm promoted me to senior director. I designed systems that protect users from digital vulnerabilities, building secure pathways that prevent exploitation. The irony is not lost on me. I spent my early professional life fixing broken architectures while ignoring the failing structural integrity of my own marriage. But the blindfold is gone now. My vision is clear. I want to take a moment to speak directly to you, the person watching this video who might be sitting in a house that feels like a beautiful trap. You might be making excuses for a partner who prioritizes their family's comfort over your basic safety. You might be emptying your bank accounts, your emotional reserves, your very identity, just to earn a seat at a table where you are only valued for what you can provide. I know the exhaustion of that performance. I know the terror of realizing the people who promise to protect you are the ones holding the lock and key. In a family ruled by a narcissist, the hierarchy is rigid and unforgiving. There is always a golden child who receives unearned praise. There is always an enabler who funds the delusion and enforces the rules. And there is always a scapegoat. The scapegoat is the person who sees the dysfunction, the person who refuses to play the assigned role. They target the scapegoat because the truth is a direct threat to their manufactured reality. They will try to isolate you. They will try to drain your resources. They will launch smear campaigns to destroy your credibility among your peers. They do this because they are terrified of what will happen if you ever realize your own strength. Victoria locked me out because my refusal to feed my son formula was a tiny crack in her foundation. She needed to punish me to reassert her dominance. Bradley backed her up because he was too weak to stand on his own 2 feet. But the cold did not break me. It woke me up. We are taught to compromise in relationships. We are told that blending into a new family requires sacrifice. But there is a distinct line between compromise and captivity. When people show you that their love is conditional upon your submission, believe them. Do not stay in the freezing cold, hoping they will eventually open the door. Turn around and build your own house. Society conditions women to believe that fighting back requires volume. We think we have to scream to be heard. We think a confrontation must involve shattered plates and tearful shouting matches. But abusers thrive on that chaos. They feed on your emotional dysregulation because it allows them to label you as unstable. It gives them the ammunition to play the victim and call you crazy. True power does not come from a screaming match. It comes from cold, calculated exits, backed by undeniable facts and airtight boundaries. It comes from securing your escape route before they even know you are looking at the door. When I walked into that sip-and-see party, I did not raise my voice. Harrison Sterling did not yell. We simply presented the truth on a high-definition screen and let their own actions incinerate their social standing. We starved them of the emotional reaction they craved and handed them the legal consequences they deserved. You do not owe your abusers an explanation. You do not owe them closure. You owe yourself safety and peace. The moment you stop seeking validation from people who are committed to misunderstanding you, your entire life will change. The fear will dissipate. The anxiety will fade. You will step into the sunlight and realize the cage was only locked from the inside. If you are the scapegoat in a family of narcissists, remember that you always hold the power to walk away. Thank you for listening. Hit subscribe, share your story below, and never let anyone leave you in the cold. The afternoon sun casts long golden streaks across the cedar planks of my lanai. Leo sits near my feet, his small hands fumbling with a set of wooden blocks. He stacks a blue square on top of a red cylinder. The structure wobbles, then tumbles onto the woven mat. He does not cry. He simply giggles, reaching for the fallen pieces to try again. I watch his resilience, this quiet, innate drive to rebuild, and a profound realization settles over me. The most significant inheritance we pass down to our children is not real estate, nor is it a stock portfolio. It is the emotional framework they use to interpret the world. My former in-laws resided in a sprawling Colorado estate, a fortress built on the illusion of the perfect American dream. They possessed every hallmark of traditional success: manicured lawns, prestigious country club memberships, a lineage of corporate titles. Yet, beneath that polished veneer, the foundation was rotting. They raised Bradley with an abundance of wealth, but a poverty of character. They equated provision with control. In their household, family responsibility meant silent obedience to the matriarch. They taught their son that a comfortable life required the sacrifice of his own moral compass. When faced with conflict, Bradley learned to shrink, to appease, to trade his integrity for a quiet afternoon. He became a man who would watch his wife and newborn turn blue in the snow rather than disrupt his mother's ego. That is the insidious danger of toxic family structures hiding behind the guise of traditional values. We often hear society champion the importance of a unified household. We are told to keep the peace, to honor our elders, to maintain the pristine image of the suburban family. But true family responsibility is rooted in fairness and mutual respect. It is the courage to stand between your child and a storm, even if the storm is raging inside your own living room. If I had remained on that icy patio, if I had apologized and walked back into that mansion, I would have handed Leo the same broken compass his father carried. Children are silent, vigilant observers. They do not learn from the lectures we deliver. They learn from the behaviors we tolerate. Had we stayed, Leo would have watched his father prioritize social standing over fundamental human decency. He would have internalized the toxic lesson that love is a transactional currency, traded only when you bend to the will of the loudest voice in the room. He would have learned that empathy is a weakness and manipulation is a tool for survival. I had to leave, not just to save my own life, but to show my son what a man should never become. Raising a child requires a deep, unflinching emotional awareness. It demands that we look at our children as distinct individuals, not as extensions of our own egos or vessels for our unfulfilled ambitions. A parent's job is to guide, to offer a steady hand while allowing the child the freedom to stumble, to fail, and to try again without the fear of losing affection. Honesty must be the bedrock of that guidance. We must be honest about our own flaws, transparent in our apologies, and fair in our discipline. When Leo makes a mistake, he will face consequences, but he will never face them alone. He will never have to earn my love by sacrificing his own voice. Navigating these complex generational cycles is a daunting, often isolating journey. We are conditioned to hide our familial fractures behind closed doors, but silence only protects the architects of our pain. Sharing these experiences brings the shadows into the light. If you find reflections of your own history within these words, if you are currently questioning the foundation of your own household, I encourage you to follow the channel Sophia Told Stories. Here we untangle the complicated threads of family dynamics, offering narratives that validate your struggles and remind you that you are never walking this path alone. I think back to the wisdom of my Hawaiian grandmother. She taught me that a true home is not defined by the thickness of its walls or the price of its furnishings. A true home is a place where your spirit is nourished, where your truth is spoken without penalty. American culture often praises rugged individualism, but true strength lies in the delicate, daily work of fostering healthy, interdependent relationships. I want to raise Leo to honor his roots, to respect the dignity of others, and to recognize that true authority comes from kindness, not intimidation. I want him to understand that loyalty should never be blind. Loyalty must be earned through consistent, honorable actions. If someone demands your allegiance while simultaneously stripping you of your dignity, they are not offering family, they are demanding servitude. I want Leo to grow into a man who will offer his coat to a stranger in a blizzard, a man who will stand up against cruelty, even when it wears a familiar face. The sun dips lower, painting the sky in vibrant shades of violet and bruised orange. A sudden cool breeze drifts in from the ocean, stirring the palm fronds. For a fleeting second, the chill brushes against my skin, sending a phantom shiver down my spine. The ghost of that Colorado winter will always linger near the edges of my memory, a quiet reminder of what it costs to escape. I lean forward and scoop Leo into my arms. He rests his head against my shoulder, his breathing steady and calm. We build our homes, we install our deadbolts, and we pray we are keeping the monsters outside. We meticulously craft the lives we want our children to inherit. But sometimes, as the daylight fades and the house grows quiet, you have to wonder. You have to look at the people sitting across your own dinner table and ask yourself the hardest question of all. Did we successfully lock the danger out, or are we just learning how to survive the cold we brought inside?